I grew up in a house that looked perfect from the outside, the kind people admired when they drove past on Willow Creek's quiet streets. White picket fence, freshly painted shutters, a swing in the backyard that creaked in the wind. To everyone else, it was a dream. To me, it was a prison. I was 7 when I realized the walls weren't just enclosing our home, they were enclosing me. My stepmother, Vivian, always had a smile ready for anyone who looked, but it never reached her eyes. Behind closed doors, her smile became something sharp, like the tip of a knife. She had rules for everything. My clothes had to be folded in a certain way. My books had to sit in perfect stacks. Even my handwriting had to be straight and tidy, or I'd hear about it for weeks. My father, Martin, was quiet, soft-spoken, and gentle in his own way. But when Vivian yelled, he looked away or convinced himself it was discipline. I learned quickly that weakness was dangerous, that showing fear or frustration was an invitation for punishment. I tried to find solace in little things, drawing in my sketchbook, reading fantasy novels in the corner of my room, but even these moments weren't safe. Vivian would peek in unannounced, scrutinizing every line I drew, every word I wrote, every crease of paper. One afternoon, I found her standing in my doorway, tapping her fingers against her chin as she said, "You really think anyone would admire this sloppy work? You're wasting your time." I nodded silently, swallowing tears, and went back to staring at the blank page. School wasn't an escape either. Sleepovers were forbidden, friends were discouraged. If I tried to sneak a phone call or even pass a note to someone in class, I was met with weeks of silence or a sharp slap that left my cheek stinging. I learned to move through life carefully, avoiding any misstep that would set Vivian off. I memorized her moods like a map, always plotting a path that kept me alive under her gaze. The nights were the worst. I'd lie awake listening to the wind press against the windows, imagining it was whispering with Vivian's voice, warning me of failure. I would sometimes sit at the edge of my bed and trace my fingers along the cover, willing myself to feel brave enough to escape. I didn't know how then, but I knew I couldn't stay forever. It all came to a head one rainy October evening. I had tried to call my friend Jenna secretly, just to hear a friendly voice. Vivian found out. The yelling started as soon as I stepped into the kitchen. Pots clanged, doors slammed, and my heart hammered against my ribs like it wanted to escape. Vivian lunged at me with a heavy wooden spoon, her eyes wide with rage. I froze, not knowing whether to fight or run. Then I saw it. A window in my bedroom slightly ajar. I didn't think. I climbed out into the cold, wet night, soaked to the bone, heart pounding, limbs trembling. I stumbled through the backyard, teeth chattering, water dripping into my shoes. My breath came in short gasps as I neared the fence. I could hear Vivian behind me, yelling my name, her voice slicing through the storm. That's when Mr. Harlan, our neighbor, appeared. His lantern bobbed like a beacon in the darkness. Vivian, in blind fury, brandished a kitchen knife. The chaos escalated, and Mr. Harlan got hurt trying to intervene. I froze, unsure whether to run or help him, but my legs moved on instinct, carrying me to the corner of Maple and Oak Avenue, where the streetlight cast a halo over my shaking form. I dialed 911 with trembling hands, whispering my story as my father tried to explain Vivian's behavior in the background. I don't think he knew how to say the words that would protect me. But the police came, Vivian was arrested, and I was taken to a foster home for the first time in my life. For the first time, I felt free. And for the first time, I felt terrified, because freedom didn't erase the memory of fear. Her voice haunted my dreams for months, every shadow in the house making me flinch. Foster life was different. My new room had soft blankets and a window I could open without fear. The foster mother, Mrs. Reynolds, smiled without malice, asked me about my day without judgment. But I didn't smile back. I had learned too early that happiness had a price. I spent nights staring at the ceiling, thinking about Willow Creek, about the sharp edge of Vivian's temper, the way the storm mirrored her rage. I felt guilty for surviving when she had hurt someone else, when Mr. Harlan had been caught in the chaos. Therapy started slowly. At first, I only nodded along, letting the therapist talk while I built walls in my mind. But gradually, I started to speak about fear, about confinement, about the way someone could smile in front of the world while carrying a storm inside. It was like unpacking a heavy bag I'd carried for years. I cried a lot, sometimes silently, sometimes in bursts I couldn't control. But slowly I felt the first threads of myself returning. School changed too. Teachers noticed I was quieter, more reserved. But there was a spark of defiance beneath it. I wasn't going to be crushed again. My foster parents encouraged friends, sleepovers, extracurriculars. I started drawing again, this time without fear of criticism. It was the first time I realized that creativity wasn't a trap. It was freedom. Even years later, the lessons Vivian left weren't easy to shake. I would pass a window with sheer curtains swaying in the wind and feel that familiar knot in my stomach. But each time I reminded myself, I was safe. I was allowed to exist. I had survived, and surviving was a choice. Time passed, and I learned to navigate life with caution, but also courage. I graduated high school with honors, earning a scholarship to a state university. Living in the dorms was terrifying at first. I was unused to trust, but I learned to meet it with boundaries. My nightmares persisted, especially when it rained or the wind pressed against windows. Yet the more I reclaimed small freedoms, the less power the past held. I still visited therapy, more by choice than by necessity. I learned the language of fear, of manipulation, of control. I started volunteering at a crisis center for kids escaping abuse. I saw myself reflected in their eyes, in their trembling voices, in the way they flinched at loud doors. I could teach them strategies I had learned the hard way: how to set boundaries, how to call for help, how to survive. Despite progress, family visits were complicated. My father had remarried since Vivian's arrest. He tried, in his quiet way, to repair our bond. Sometimes I accepted his presence. Other times I couldn't bear the memory of him looking away as Vivian hurt me. My anger was a shadow I carried into adulthood, but I learned that forgiveness didn't mean forgetting. It meant reclaiming power over my emotions. College brought new friendships, new independence. I started writing short stories, sometimes loosely inspired by my experiences, sometimes pure fiction. Writing became a way to process fear and reclaim narrative control. I realized that storytelling was a weapon against silence, a shield against memories that tried to suffocate me. I met people who never judged me for flinching when a door slammed, who never criticized my perfectionist tendencies, who never asked why I spent extra time checking locks. They didn't try to fix me. They let me heal at my own pace. I learned the difference between love that supports and love that confines. One evening, back in Willow Creek for a brief visit, I walked past the old Thompson house. It looked smaller somehow, less intimidating from the sidewalk. I remembered climbing out of my bedroom window, the rain soaking through my hair, the terror in my chest as I ran. The memories were sharp, but they no longer controlled me. I had survived them. I found courage in reflection. I realized that fear could teach as much as it could harm. Vivian had tried to convince me that my choices didn't matter, that my voice was irrelevant. Yet every choice I had made to protect myself, every whispered phone call, every quiet defiance had led me here, alive, stronger, capable. The house was a lesson in vigilance, yes, but also in resilience. Therapy helped me see the subtle dangers of manipulation and control. I understood that abuse wasn't always visible. It often wore a smile, carried a kind word, or hid behind normalcy. Recognizing the signs meant I could protect myself in the future. I started mentoring teens in similar situations, showing them how to navigate fear, how to trust cautiously, and how to reclaim life even after trauma. My experience gave me perspective, and perspective gave me purpose. The girl who once flinched at every shadow now had a voice that others listened to. By my early 20s, I had a life of my own, A small apartment, a job I loved, friends who were family. I still remembered Willow Creek, still carried the lessons of fear and courage, but I no longer let shadows rule me. I could sleep through storms, open windows, and move freely in my space. My past was a teacher, not a jailer. One afternoon, a storm rolled in. Rain pelted the windows, and the wind whispered against the walls. I paused for a moment, feeling the old familiar tension, then laughed softly at myself. I was no longer the child who climbed out of windows to escape. I was a woman who had survived, who had learned, who had reclaimed life. I thought about Clara, the girl I had been. Brave, terrified, resilient. I thought about Vivian, about the lessons she had imposed, and about the neighbors, the strangers, the helpers who reminded me that safety was possible. Most importantly, I realized that even in darkness, there is a path toward light. It might be narrow, wet, and treacherous, but it exists, and survival is its own kind of freedom. Life often hides danger behind smiles and perfection, and fear can take root in the most familiar places. Yet courage is not the absence of fear. It is the choice to survive, to reclaim your voice, and to find freedom even after trauma. True strength is learning to protect yourself, trust wisely, and never let the shadows of the past define your future. I grew up in a house that looked ordinary from the street, with beige siding, a neatly trimmed lawn, and a mailbox that always had fresh flowers in the pot next to it. To anyone passing by Ashwood, Oregon, it was a picture of suburban normalcy. But inside, it was nothing like normal. My stepmother, Margaret, had rules for everything. Not just the obvious things, chores, homework, dinner, but the little, invisible details too. A crumb on the counter could earn you a week of silent treatment. A smudge on the mirror could earn a slap that stung far longer than the moment itself. I remember being 13 when I first realized that Margaret wasn't just strict. She was controlling in ways that went beyond discipline. Floors had to be scrubbed multiple times a day, windows polished until they gleamed, and the air itself had to feel orderly. My younger brother, Ethan, bore the brunt of it. He was 10 then, small and nervous, and Margaret would force him into long baths with harsh soap, scrubbing until his skin burned red. I would watch, frozen, wanting to intervene but knowing I would only make it worse. She had a way of noticing everything, even when I thought I had hidden him under towels or in closets. My father, Greg, worked long hours as an accountant. He was quiet, polite, and gentle, but oblivious. He trusted Margaret to discipline the kids, believing it was for our own good. Sometimes I would see the brief flicker of concern in his eyes, but it never lasted. He would shrug and go back to work. I learned early that I had to take care of Ethan myself, shielding him as best I could while keeping my own head down. School wasn't any refuge either. I tried to fit in, tried to be a normal teenager, but the constant tension at home followed me like a shadow. Friends noticed the way I flinched at sudden noises, how I avoided sleepovers, how I rarely laughed. Some drifted away, uncomfortable with the heaviness I carried. Others whispered, asking if something was wrong with me, as if fear was contagious. I invited one classmate, Lily, over one afternoon, desperate for normalcy. Margaret appeared in the kitchen without warning, inspecting every dish, correcting my posture, and forcing Ethan to scrub the counters until he was crying. Lily left quietly, and I felt the suffocating weight of isolation settle even deeper. It was during one of those nights, after Margaret had accused Ethan of not lining up his socks correctly, that I began to notice the journals. Hidden in a drawer, filled with meticulous notes about our routines, our habits, our fears, and even our private thoughts. They were her obsession on paper. I read only a few lines before feeling nauseated, realizing she had been watching and recording us in secret for months. Every whispered conversation, every private glance, every flinch, documented. I couldn't breathe, couldn't think. This wasn't just strict parenting, it was a cage built with observation and cruelty. The turning point came on a night heavy with rain. I woke up hungry, my stomach gnawing, and crept to the kitchen, hoping for a slice of bread. Margaret appeared silently behind me, her eyes wide, voice sharp and precise. "Hands off the fridge. You touch anything without gloves and you'll regret it." I froze, fear curling in my stomach, and backed away. The house was never dark, never quiet when she was awake. Sometimes she would stand silently by my bed, whisper complaints about the way I breathed or the way I moved. Fear had a way of lodging itself in my chest, heavy and unrelenting, and I realized that I couldn't wait for rescue. That night, I made a plan. I whispered to Ethan that it was time to leave. He nodded, his small hand clutching mine tightly, his eyes wide with both fear and relief. I packed essentials quietly, moving through shadows, avoiding squeaky floorboards, careful not to wake the nightmare that was Margaret. Outside, rain soaked our clothes, chilled our bones, but the fear of being caught drove us forward. The house loomed behind us, silent except for the drip of water off the eaves, a reminder of everything we were leaving behind. Ethan and I ran down the street, wet shoes slapping against asphalt, hearts hammering in unison. Every passing car made me flinch, every shadow looked like Margaret. I whispered instructions. "Stay close. Don't look back. Keep your hands in front of you." He nodded, his tiny form trembling beside me. The rain drenched my hair, but I didn't notice. Survival was all that mattered. We reached the shelter a few blocks away, a small brick building with a warm light in the window. The smell of disinfectant and food hit me like a wall, but it was safety. For the first time in years, I could breathe without feeling someone's eyes on me. Volunteers wrapped blankets around us and handed us warm cups of cocoa. Ethan leaned into me, exhausted, still shaking. I held him as best as I could, whispering that we were safe now. The next days were a blur. Social workers asked questions, filled out forms, and reassured us that Margaret wouldn't find us here. I had trouble speaking at first, words lodged in my throat, the habit of silence ingrained from years of fear. But slowly, the story poured out. Every night I had tiptoed across the kitchen, every bath forced on Ethan, every silent treatment and yell, every journal Margaret had kept. I told them all. And they listened. They believed us. Even though the shelter felt safe, my mind didn't. Shadows in corners, creaking floors, unexpected noises, all of it made me jump. I started sleeping with the lights on, checking doors repeatedly, double-checking locks. It was a small comfort, a way to reclaim some control. I didn't know if I would ever fully shake the habits Margaret had forced into me, but I had survived, and that counted for something. Therapy started slowly. At first, I only nodded along, letting the counselor speak while I built walls inside my mind. But she was patient, never forcing, never judging. I began to talk. About Ethan, about fear, about the silent terror that had followed me for years. Crying felt dangerous at home, but here it felt like a relief. I cried until my cheeks were raw and my throat hoarse, and slowly, something light began to return. School had to be rebuilt too. Teachers noticed my withdrawn nature, but also the spark that refused to die, the quiet defiance beneath the fear. I started connecting with classmates, cautiously at first. I learned that friendships could exist without fear, that laughter didn't have to be punished, that meals didn't have to carry terror. These were small victories, but in a life built on silence and control, small victories were everything. Even in the safe environment of the shelter, I couldn't forget Margaret. Her voice echoed in my mind, her eyes watching from every corner, her journals documenting us. It was a constant reminder that abuse leaves marks that aren't always visible, scars that survive even after the danger is gone. But I clung to the thought that we had escaped, that fear no longer dictated every movement. Weeks turned into months. Ethan and I were placed in a foster home that smelled faintly of vanilla and pine cleaner, where the rules were fair and gentle. My foster parents never peeked over my shoulder, never criticized every word I spoke. For the first time, I could relax in my own skin, breathe without calculating what might set someone off, and even laugh without guilt. Therapy continued, and I started to understand the subtle mechanisms of control and fear that Margaret had imposed on us. It wasn't just the yelling, the punishments, or the journals. It was the constant surveillance, the manipulation, the uncertainty. Every action was monitored, every choice questioned. I realized that freedom was more than just physical escape. It was reclaiming my mind, my sense of agency, and my right to exist without fear. School became a place of gradual reintegration. I started joining clubs, attending study groups, and even volunteering at the library. I built friendships slowly, testing boundaries, learning trust in increments. Some days were easier than others, and sometimes the memories would hit hard. A sudden wave of fear when a door slammed or someone moved too quickly behind me. But I reminded myself that I was no longer at Margaret's mercy, that safety was not a fluke. Writing became my refuge. I filled notebooks with stories, often loosely inspired by my experiences, sometimes entirely imagined. Each page was a small act of control, a reclaiming of narrative that Margaret had tried to take from me. Words became armor, and slowly I began to see myself as more than a victim. I was a survivor, a protector, a sister, a young woman reclaiming life she had been denied. High school graduation came, and with it, the possibility of independence. I moved into a small apartment with Ethan, working part-time and saving every dollar. The world felt enormous, frightening and exhilarating all at once. Every sound in the apartment, creaking floorboards, the hum of the fridge, made me pause. Sometimes I jumped at shadows, scanned rooms for hidden observers, and double-checked locks more times than necessary. It was habit, but it was also survival. I began helping other teens who had experienced similar abuse. Volunteering at crisis centers, mentoring younger kids, teaching them how to assert boundaries, how to trust carefully, how to survive when the world feels hostile. Sharing my story became a tool, a shield for others who felt powerless. And through their courage, I found more of my own. Returning briefly to Ashwood one fall, I walked past my old house. It looked smaller somehow, ordinary, mundane. I remembered nights spent crouched under blankets holding Ethan, listening to Margaret's footsteps and breathing. The memories were sharp, but they no longer controlled me. I could look and not flinch. I could breathe and not panic. I had survived, and that meant I could live. By my 19th birthday, life felt steady for the first time. A small circle of friends, a part-time job I loved, nights that weren't haunted by fear. I still carried lessons from my past, caution, vigilance, empathy, but they were no longer chains. Shadows no longer dominated my days. I had reclaimed my life. Sometimes I still see fleeting reminders, a harsh tone in someone's voice, a polished floor, a journal left open. But now I recognize them for what they are, moments to navigate, not moments to cower. I learned that freedom is not granted. It is taken, fought for, and nurtured. I learned that courage doesn't erase fear, but it allows you to act despite it. And most importantly, I learned that abuse does not define you. Surviving it, reclaiming yourself, and protecting those you love does. Abuse often hides behind normalcy and smiles, leaving invisible scars that linger even after escape. But survival is an act of courage, and reclaiming life is a process of persistence and self-respect. True freedom comes from recognizing danger, trusting wisely, and choosing to live boldly despite past trauma. Courage isn't the absence of fear. It's acting in spite of it, and creating a life that fear cannot dominate. I had been looking forward to the sleepover at Clara Benson's house for weeks. 17 and desperate for normal teenage fun, I packed my bag with snacks, a flashlight, and a notebook I sometimes doodled in when nervous. Clara's house on the quiet streets of Briarwood, Maine, had always seemed welcoming from the outside. White clapboard siding, neatly trimmed hedges, and a small porch swing that swayed even without a breeze. Her mom, Vivienne, was always polite and cheerful, while her stepdad, Robert, had a calm, approachable manner. But there was something off. I couldn't explain it exactly, not yet. It wasn't Vivian or Robert. They seemed genuinely nice. It was Derek, Clara's older brother. He had been away for months at a juvenile facility, and since his return the house felt tense, unpredictable. He didn't smile much anymore, and his eyes carried something that made me instinctively shrink a little whenever he entered a room. The evening started normally enough. Clara and I sprawled on her bedroom floor, whispering and giggling over shared secrets and plans for school, snacks scattered between us. Outside, October winds rattled the windows, shaking loose leaves from the trees. I tried to push the uneasy feeling away, telling myself it was just the stormy night and the creaking old house. But I noticed Derek leaning in the doorway, arms crossed, silent, observing every movement. I caught Clara glancing nervously at him too, but we both pretended it wasn't bothering us. Vivian came in with 2 mugs of hot chocolate, smiling. "Girls, don't stay up too late," she said cheerfully. But even her voice carried a stiffness, a hint of tension that didn't belong in her usual warmth. Derek didn't respond, just stared at us with that quiet intensity that made the room feel smaller, heavier. I tried to focus on the chocolate, swirling the whipped cream into my drink, but I couldn't shake the sensation that something was about to go wrong. By the time night fell and the fog rolled in, thick and heavy across the streets, the atmosphere had shifted. Shadows clung to corners, every thump or creak in the house amplified. Derek remained in the background, silent but watching. I kept glancing at the door, imagining it swinging open at any second. Clara noticed my unease and whispered, "I hate how he's just there, watching." I nodded, trying to smile, but it felt hollow. There was no way to know how long the silence would last before it broke. It did, abruptly. Derek stormed into the living room, yelling at Clara over a small argument about money. It wasn't the conversation itself, but the way his anger escalated, fast, unpredictable, dangerous. He grabbed a heavy baseball bat that had been leaning in the corner. Vivian tried to step between them, voice trembling, but it was useless. Fear gripped me, cold and raw. This wasn't a prank, a teenage scolding, or a momentary temper flare. This was a threat I could feel in my bones. Clara grabbed my hand and we bolted to her bedroom, slamming the door behind us. My hands shook as I dialed 911, whispering our situation. Derek pounded on the door, yelling, threatening, while Vivian's voice trembled from the hallway, trying and failing to control him. We had no choice but to consider an escape, through the second-story window, into the cold, foggy night. Climbing out the window was terrifying. The wooden frame groaned under our weight, rain soaking our hair and clothes. I rolled on the damp grass, the wind biting through my pajamas, heart hammering in my chest. Clara followed, her grip on my hand tight, trembling. Derek's yelling echoed behind us, and I imagined him coming after us any second. My legs pumped through the fog, branches slapping my arms, until we finally spotted the silhouette of an old caretaker's cabin at the edge of the property. We ran toward it, stumbling through the underbrush, terrified of making a sound, afraid Derek might catch us. I held my breath as we knocked on the weathered door. A man appeared, startled, but quickly realized our danger. He ushered us inside, helping us stay quiet and warm until the police arrived. The relief was immediate and overwhelming, but I could still feel my chest tight, muscles coiled, adrenaline refusing to leave. When the police questioned us, I struggled to find words. I wanted to explain everything, the tension that had built over weeks, the unease that had always been present, Derek's sudden violent outburst, the fear that had settled in my chest like a stone. Clara whispered encouragement, and we managed to recount the events clearly. Derek was arrested, and Vivian and Robert were questioned, but the relief didn't completely settle. I realized that danger can exist in places that seem safe, even homes that appear ordinary. Even after the immediate danger passed, the memory haunted me. Shadows seemed too sharp. Sudden noises made my pulse spike, and I had to check doors multiple times at night. Sleepovers became terrifying, and trust became something fragile and difficult to grant. I realized that fear wasn't something that vanished overnight. It lingered, a quiet presence in my thoughts, always reminding me that the world isn't always what it seems. School felt alien after that night. I found myself avoiding eye contact, jumping at small movements, my mind replaying the incident over and over. Some friends noticed my quietness, whispered concerns that I brushed aside. Others didn't notice, unaware of how quickly a familiar environment could turn into a place of terror. Even routine moments, walking down hallways using lockers, brought flashes of panic. I had survived, but my resilience had been tested in a way I hadn't anticipated. Vivian reached out after the incident, trying to explain her role and her failure to control Derek. I listened, nodded politely, but I didn't feel reassured. Safety wasn't something she could promise. It had to be taken and protected, something I now understood on a visceral level. I learned quickly that trust must be earned, even in situations where adults are supposed to protect you. In the weeks that followed, I tried to reclaim some semblance of normal life, though it was difficult. Therapy helped, slowly untangling the threads of fear that had settled in my chest. Talking about the night, about Derek, about the moments leading up to the chaos, was exhausting but necessary. Each session left me drained, but a little stronger. I began understanding that courage isn't always loud. It's measured, quiet, and sometimes only noticeable in hindsight. Clara and I stayed close, bound by a shared ordeal. We rebuilt our sleepovers carefully, testing boundaries, setting rules, and communicating constantly. Small victories, laughing over a movie, sharing snacks without fear, even walking home together, became monumental. It was a lesson in reclaiming space that had been tainted by fear, showing me that safety could be rebuilt piece by piece. Even back at school, I became more cautious but also more aware. I noticed warning signs, subtle cues of tension, and learned to trust my instincts. I realized that danger doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes it hides behind quiet eyes, polite smiles, and familiar routines. Recognizing this was empowering. I could act before things escalated. I wasn't powerless anymore. Writing became a refuge. I journaled every night, detailing memories, emotions, fears, and small victories. The act of writing grounded me, gave me control over the narrative of my life. I learned to translate panic into words, fear into structure, chaos into order. It was subtle therapy that reminded me I was no longer just a victim. I was a participant in my own story. Months passed and I grew stronger. I learned how to navigate social situations with awareness, how to assert boundaries, and how to respond calmly in tense moments. I volunteered at a youth center, mentoring kids who had faced trauma. Sharing my experience helped me process my own fears and taught me that resilience isn't innate. It's learned through experience, reflection, and action. Sometimes, the memory of that foggy October night returned. Derek's shadowy figure, the pounding footsteps, Vivian's anxious voice. But it no longer paralyzed me. I could breathe through panic, think clearly, and act decisively. Fear had not disappeared, but it had become manageable, a signal rather than a prison. The experience shaped my understanding of trust. I realized that protection cannot always be guaranteed by others. Sometimes, survival depends on courage, quick thinking, and decisive action. I learned to balance caution with confidence, vulnerability with awareness. It was a lesson in self-reliance that I hadn't expected to learn at 17. By the time I turned 18, life had started to feel steady. I had friends I trusted, routines I controlled, and a sense of independence that was hard-won. I still remembered that night in vivid detail, the fog, the rain, the fear, but those memories no longer ruled me. They were reminders of what I had survived and what I could endure. I reflected on the lessons I had learned, that danger can hide in familiar places, that courage often comes in small acts of quick thinking, and that resilience is built through confronting fear, not avoiding it. I understood now that trauma doesn't disappear, but it can be integrated into your story in a way that empowers rather than confines. I had survived, and in doing so, I had discovered a strength I never knew I possessed. Life would always carry shadows, but I had learned to navigate them with awareness, courage, and the knowledge that I was capable of protecting myself. Even in familiar, seemingly safe environments, danger can lurk unexpectedly. True courage is not the absence of fear, but the ability to act decisively despite it. Survival depends on quick thinking, awareness, and the willingness to reclaim your own safety. Trauma shapes resilience, and strength is built not by avoiding fear, but by confronting it and choosing life in the face of it. I grew up in a house that looked ordinary from the road, a small weather-beaten farmhouse on the outskirts of Sawyer, South Dakota. To anyone passing by, it looked quiet and peaceful. Snow drifting lazily across the yard in winter, smoke curling from the chimney, wind chimes swaying gently in the summer. But inside, the air was heavy with fear, and every corner of that house had a shadow that didn't belong. My father, Keith Carter, was distant. He worked long hours at a local factory, but when he came home, the smell of alcohol clung to him, and he sank into the worn recliner as if the world could leave him alone if he ignored it long enough. That left my stepmother, Linda, in complete control. In public, she smiled perfectly, waved at neighbors, and hosted dinners with a warmth that seemed almost fake when I watched from the kitchen doorway. At home, she ruled like a tyrant. Minor mistakes, leaving a plate in the sink, a wrinkled shirt, a smudge on the window, could earn us punishment. Yelling, slaps, or sometimes being locked in the freezing garage for hours. From as early as I could remember, fear was a constant companion. I tried to keep Sam, my younger brother, and Rosie, my little sister, safe, shielding them as best I could. But there were days when even I felt helpless. Linda's punishments escalated over the years. She burned my arm with cigarettes once because I moved too slowly folding laundry. She shoved me into dark closets to punish me for minor things, like whispering to Rosie about school. Those hours felt eternal, the black walls pressing in, my body shaking, and my mind screaming for freedom. I found small ways to reclaim a sense of control. I hid snacks, wrote letters to my pen pal under the bed, and snuck outside for brief walks when Linda wasn't watching. Each time I felt the snow crunch beneath my feet or the wind on my face, I felt a small flicker of freedom. But it was always temporary. Linda's eyes seemed to be everywhere, and her punishments reminded me that even the smallest acts of independence carried risk. One night in January, the cold wind howling through the broken window seals, Linda discovered my hidden letters. I had just tucked them into the back of a kitchen drawer, thinking no one would notice. But she did. She tore the papers from my hands, reading aloud in a voice sharp with fury. "You think you can hide things from me?" she hissed, throwing the letters to the floor. "You're worthless. You're nothing without me." Sam and Rosie huddled behind the couch, silent and trembling, while Linda's yelling filled the house. I tried to calm her, to explain, but her fury only increased. She slammed doors, kicked chairs, and threw objects across the room. My heart pounded so hard I thought she would hear it. In that moment, I realized we couldn't wait for help. If we stayed, the night would end with more than bruises. We had to act. I whispered to Sam and Rosie, voices shaking. "We're leaving tonight. We can't stay here anymore. Grab your warm clothes and whatever you need. We have to be quiet." Their wide eyes met mine. Trust and fear mixed in equal measure. I helped them pack silently, socks, jackets, a few blankets, and wrapped my arms around them as the wind bit at our fingers. We waited until Linda went into the kitchen, muttering to herself, then crept out the back door. Snow crunched beneath our bare feet, icy and biting, but the fear of being caught was worse than the cold. I held Sam's hand, pulled Rosie close, and guided them across the frozen yard. Each step was a battle with my panic, but also a small triumph. We were running toward freedom. The night was bitterly cold. Snow drifted across the fields, frosting the bare trees, and the wind cut through our jackets as if it knew we were escaping something. My lungs burned, my fingers were numb, and my mind raced with fear. fear that Linda or my father might notice and come after us. I whispered instructions constantly. Keep close, don't make noise, don't stop moving. Sam shivered, teeth chattering, but I couldn't slow down. We're almost there, I told him, even though I wasn't sure. Rosie clutched my arm, trembling, and I could feel her fear as if it were my own. Every shadow seemed alive, every branch a hand reaching for us. My mind ran scenarios, imagining being caught, imagining Linda's face twisted in fury. But the thought of staying trapped in that house was worse. Eventually, we spotted the glow of a gas station down Route 18. Relief washed over me like heat, though my legs refused to slow. We stumbled through the parking lot, snow melting into our shoes, and the attendant looked up from his coffee, alarmed. "What's going on?" he asked. I barely managed words. "Please, help. We need the police." Sam and Rosie were both crying now, clutching blankets I had pulled from the house. The attendant quickly called 911, ushering us inside, where warmth met our frozen bodies. The officers arrived within minutes. Linda and Keith were arrested, and for the first time I felt a strange mix of relief and guilt. Relief that we were safe, and guilt for the terror that had unfolded in our home over the years. I realized that the house, the place that had been my prison, was finally empty of their control. Even after that night, the fear didn't leave immediately. Nights were the hardest. I would wake up drenched in sweat, convinced I heard Linda's voice calling me from the dark, or her steps on the porch. Therapy began slowly, helping me untangle the years of fear, mistrust, and hypervigilance that had embedded themselves in my mind. I learned that trauma isn't something that simply disappears. It lingers, like frost in a dark corner, waiting for warmth to melt it away. School was another adjustment. Friends noticed my quietness, my sudden flinches at loud noises, and my careful observation of people around me. I tried to explain, but words often failed me. Instead, I learned to navigate social spaces cautiously, observing before speaking, testing trust in small increments. I couldn't erase what happened, but I could protect myself from it continuing. Small acts became victories, allowing myself to eat without fear, sleeping with the lights off, trusting a teacher to notice if I needed help. Every day, every act of courage reminded me that I had survived. That survival was not just physical, it was mental, emotional, and moral. I realized that freedom wasn't given. It had to be taken, fought for, and protected. Over time, life in foster care offered a strange sense of safety. My siblings and I were placed together finally, in a small house where warmth, routine, and genuine concern replaced fear and unpredictability. My foster parents never raised a hand in anger, never scolded in rage. It was a strange, unfamiliar sensation. Meals that weren't interrogations, doors that weren't monitored, and space that felt mine to occupy. Therapy became a refuge. I would recount events with as much detail as I could manage, letting the counselor guide me through the emotions tied to each memory. The memories were raw, the cigarette burns, the dark closets, the constant vigilance, but speaking them aloud made me feel lighter, though the process was exhausting. I began to see myself not just as a survivor, but as someone capable of reclaiming life, capable of protecting my siblings, capable of making choices for my own safety and happiness. School became a space for rebuilding. I cautiously reached out to friends, tested the waters with small social risks, and allowed myself to laugh again. Some days were easier than others, and sudden noises or raised voices still triggered panic. But I could now pause, breathe, and remind myself that I was no longer trapped. Every laugh, every conversation, every small connection was a victory over the years of fear. I also began writing again, a habit I had started before Linda's control had escalated. Words became a sanctuary. I poured my anger, my fear, and my triumphs into pages that no one would read but me. Each sentence was a reclaiming of control, a declaration that my voice mattered. It was therapy in its purest form, and it strengthened me for the battles of recovery still ahead. The following years were slow, deliberate work. I learned how to set boundaries, to navigate relationships carefully, and to recognize red flags before they escalated. I learned how to assert myself in a world that had taught me silence for survival. I began mentoring other children who had faced abuse, helping them understand that survival was possible, that courage could be cultivated, and that freedom could be claimed even from the darkest circumstances. Despite progress, memories never disappeared. I could still recall Linda's voice, her laughter masking cruelty, the sting of cigarette burns, and the bitter cold of the garage where I had been locked. But those memories no longer controlled me. They were reminders of strength I had discovered within myself, evidence that fear could be survived and overcome. I also grew protective of Sam and Rosie, making sure that they never experienced helplessness in the same way. Our bond strengthened as we rebuilt trust in each other and the world. The experience taught us all the importance of vigilance, care, and mutual support. By the time I was 18, I felt like a different person. A survivor, yes, but also someone who had reclaimed life in a way Linda could never take from me. I could sleep through the night, laugh without fear, and plan for a future not dictated by terror. I was independent, cautious, and aware, but free in ways I had never imagined as a child. Reflecting on our journey, I realized that courage is not the absence of fear, but the ability to act despite it. I had faced cruelty, danger, and betrayal, yet I had protected my siblings, acted decisively, and survived. Trauma does not vanish, but it can shape resilience, awareness, and strength that carry into adulthood. Even in the most isolated and controlled environments, courage and love can carve a path to freedom. True strength is not defined by the absence of fear, but by the determination to act, protect, and reclaim life. Survival is not just physical, it is mental, emotional, and moral, and it is built through persistence, awareness, and unwavering care for oneself and others. I never thought a small apartment could feel like a prison. Looking back, I should have seen the signs long before I moved in with Veronica, Clara's stepmother. My name's Lucas Harper, 27, and at the time, I was desperate. Clara was pregnant with our first child, and I had just lost my job at the shipping company I'd worked at for 5 years. The bills were piling up, my savings were gone, and my pride was crumbling faster than I could patch it. When Veronica offered her apartment as a temporary place for us to stay, I thought it was a lifeline. I didn't know it would become a cage. At first, Veronica seemed perfect, polished, organized, polite, the kind of person who smiled at neighbors, baked cookies for the building kids, and made small talk with people in the lobby. "You two will be safe here," she said, her smile warm. "I'll make sure everything is perfect before the baby arrives." I wanted to believe her. Clara clung to that hope too. We didn't have the energy to see past it, but the cracks started appearing almost immediately. I noticed the way she watched me when I cooked, as if every motion was a test. "You're using too much oil," she said one morning, eyebrows raised. "We don't want the place smelling like a diner." I laughed it off, trying not to let it sting, but the laughter never reached my eyes. Soon, every action had rules, every decision a hidden judgment. She scrutinized the way I spent money, insisting I save receipts and justify purchases. She criticized the way Clara moved through the apartment, the way she folded laundry, even the way she spoke. It wasn't loud. It wasn't overt abuse. It was subtle, almost invisible to outsiders, but sharp enough to make me feel small every single day. I started second-guessing every move. I hesitated before saying anything to Clara in the living room, afraid her stepmother would overhear and decide I wasn't fit to take care of my family. Sleep came in short bursts, often interrupted by the tension in the apartment. I wanted to protect my family, but I felt trapped. One evening, she handed me a set of envelopes. "I need you to deliver these for me," she said, voice calm, eyes steady. I looked at the addresses. They were scattered around the city, all to people I didn't know, all in neighborhoods I would have avoided. Are you sure about this? I asked, unease tightening my chest. She gave me that same smile that made my stomach twist. If you love Clara, you'll do it. Don't test me, Lucas. That night, as I drove through the foggy streets of Brighton, the weight of her words pressed down on me. I realized her control extended beyond the apartment. It reached my every choice, my every breath. Living with Veronica became a daily exercise in tension management. I learned to tiptoe around her moods, to guess her expectations, and to punish myself for minor errors before she had the chance. One evening, she left a note on the kitchen counter. "You didn't clean under the sink. Pay attention." Simple words, but they carried the weight of a storm. Clara tried to reassure me, saying, "She doesn't mean it like that." But I could feel the cold, calculated way she watched us, always measuring, always judging. Her manipulation wasn't just emotional, it was strategic. She would insist I take on side jobs for her, claiming it was to prove responsibility. Most of them were harmless, like carrying packages or running errands, but others were questionable. I remember the night she handed me a small box and told me to drop it off at a warehouse district on the outskirts of the city. "Be back before midnight," she said, lips tight. No excuses. I hesitated, feeling the familiar pit of fear in my stomach. Clara pleaded with me to be careful, and I promised I would. The streets were slick with rain, fog curling around streetlights, making the world look like a ghost town. On my way, I stumbled upon a violent confrontation outside a cafe. A man screaming, another shoving him to the ground. I froze, heart hammering. The incident rattled me, but I kept moving, adrenaline and fear driving me forward. Veronica's words echoed in my mind. No excuses. When I returned, drenched and shaken, I confronted her. "This isn't safe. I can't keep doing these things." Her reaction was immediate. A sharp look, the tiniest twitch in her jaw like a trap snapping closed. "Excuses," she said coldly. "You either do what's asked or you fail your family. Choose." For the first time, I felt rage welling up behind my fear. I stood my ground, my voice trembling but firm. "I'm done letting fear control my life. We're leaving this apartment if you can't respect boundaries." She blinked, then left in a huff, slamming the door behind her. Silence. Peace. And yet, even relief came with anxiety. I knew the scars she left in our minds wouldn't disappear overnight. Weeks passed. The apartment felt lighter without her constant presence, but the anxiety lingered like an unwelcome guest. I tried to reclaim the space for Clara and me, rearranging furniture, cooking meals without inspection, laughing at small jokes without guilt. But there were moments I caught myself scanning the shadows, imagining her standing in the hallway, smiling coldly. PTSD isn't always loud. Sometimes it whispers in the middle of the night, in small flickers of doubt and fear. Clara noticed the change in me, and we talked long into the evenings about our plans, our hopes for the baby, our dreams of leaving Brighton for a fresh start. I promised myself I wouldn't let fear dictate my actions anymore. But the lessons Veronica taught me, the vigilance, the hyper-awareness, remained embedded. It took conscious effort to remind myself that not everyone was out to control us, that a smile could be genuine. Then came the day I realized how deep the manipulation had cut. I found an old envelope from Veronica tucked behind the radiator. Threats, criticisms, lists of failures she thought I had committed. I held it in my hands, trembling. I thought of all the nights I lay awake, heart racing, wondering if she would strike next. I had been surviving, yes, but the survival had been a slow erosion of my confidence. I made a vow. Never again would I allow anyone to hold such power over me. Months later, we moved into a small flat of our own. The space was humble, but ours. For the first time, I felt like I could breathe. I set boundaries early, making it clear that no one could manipulate us with fear. Clara and I learned to communicate openly, to share anxieties before they festered, and to celebrate victories, small and large, without fear of judgment. I enrolled in a new job and the baby arrived healthy, bringing with him a sense of purpose that no job loss or stepmother's cruelty could ever take away. Occasionally I would catch myself tensing when a visitor entered, expecting cold eyes or calculated smiles. But over time these moments passed. I realized the lasting effects of manipulation weren't just in the memories. They were in the habits it left behind. Each day I had to actively rebuild trust in myself, in Clara, and in the world around me. Years have passed since that chapter of my life, but the lessons remain. I think back to the nights I drove through foggy streets, heart racing, doing what I thought I had to survive. I remember the notes, the cold stares, the manipulations that crept into every corner of our lives. And yet, I also remember standing up that night, telling Veronica that her control was over. That moment defined me as much as any triumph or failure. Now, when I face challenges, big or small, I carry that experience with me. Not as fear, but as a reminder of resilience, self-worth, and courage. Life will always have people who try to control or manipulate, but the lesson I learned is universal. Freedom begins with setting boundaries, even when it terrifies you, and protecting those you love requires both vigilance and courage. Control and fear can take root anywhere, but acknowledging them and asserting your independence is the first step toward reclaiming your life. True strength isn't never being afraid. It's standing firm despite that fear, and teaching those around you the power of respect, dignity, and boundaries. I never thought I'd feel older than my years at 17, but after Mom died, that was exactly who I became, the stand-in parent for Eli and Noah. Our house in Riverton had always been lively, the kind of place where laughter echoed through the halls, and even small arguments over toys or cereal boxes felt normal. Mom's death changed all of that in an instant. One day she was sitting on the couch, reading a book, laughing at some joke I didn't even catch, and the next she was gone. 2 years had passed, but I still caught myself glancing around, expecting her to call our names from the kitchen. Dad tried. He really did. He took on more shifts at work, tried to cook sometimes, and reminded us he loved us. But grief had a way of burying him, leaving the house quiet in a different kind of way. I kept Eli and Noah on track, made sure they had homework done, fed them, tucked them in at night. Sometimes I'd lie awake after they fell asleep, staring at the ceiling, thinking I was holding it all together, but inside, I was breaking in pieces. Then Lena came. She wasn't abrupt or cruel at first. She smiled too much, wore perfume that smelled like fake vanilla, and laughed a little too loudly at Dad's jokes. I tried to be polite. I wanted to like her. I wanted everything to be normal again. But I knew, deep down, something didn't fit. Lena's eyes lingered too long on locked drawers. She appeared in rooms without explanation, standing silently, as if she were observing me, Eli, and Noah like specimens in a cage. One night I found her leaning against the wall outside Eli's room. He was playing with his blocks quietly. She didn't move, didn't blink, just stared. "Maya," she said finally, voice soft, almost sweet. "Why do you let him make such a mess?" I stiffened, my stomach twisting. "It's just blocks," I said. "He's 2. He's learning." She smiled. "Too wide, too fixed. Learning doesn't excuse chaos," she said, and for a moment I froze under her gaze. I tried to tell Dad. "He's just adjusting," he said when I brought it up, and I could see him trying to balance caution with trust. "Give her time, Maya. She's just trying to fit in." I nodded, but inside I already knew. Time wouldn't make this okay. Time wouldn't make Lena less invasive. I started noticing little things she left around. Sticky notes in books, lists in drawers, always observing, always cataloging. Every step I took felt watched. One afternoon, while tidying Noah's toys, I found a small notebook hidden behind his building blocks. Scribbled on every page, repeatedly, were lines describing what I did each day, what I said when I went to bed. My chest tightened. Lena wasn't just meddling, she was planning, recording, waiting. I stuffed the notebook into my backpack, my hand shaking. I had to keep it hidden, at least until I could figure out what to do. That night, Eli cried after a minor accident with a cup of milk. Lena came into the room silently, towering over him. Her shadow fell across his tiny body. "Stop whining," she whispered. He flinched and began crying harder. I couldn't stand it. My hands shook as I pulled him close. She didn't say a word. She just looked at me and then left, smiling that same frozen smile. I lay awake that night thinking, how do you fight someone who smiles while hurting the people you love? How do you make your father see what you already know? Over the next few weeks, the tension became unbearable. Lena's subtle comments turned sharper. "You really think that's the right way to do it?" She'd ask about my chores or how I fed the boys. When she wasn't speaking, she was watching, leaning casually against door frames, standing too close when I passed, eyes cold and unblinking. Even when she pretended to help, there was always a glint in her eye, a sense that she was testing me, measuring me, trying to see how far she could push. One night I caught her standing over Eli while he slept. I froze in the hallway, heart pounding. She didn't notice me at first. Then her head turned slowly, and she smiled, soft, sweet, but empty. My chest constricted. I wanted to scream, but my voice felt trapped behind my teeth. I backed away quietly, locked myself in my room, and held my knees to my chest until the shaking passed. I tried to tell Dad again. "She's just adjusting. Give her time," he said, sighing. I saw his eyes flicker with doubt for a moment, but he looked away too quickly, like he didn't want to face it. I stopped talking to him about it after that. If he wouldn't see it, I'd have to protect my brothers myself. I began taking precautions, locks on doors, lights on at night, checking the house before bedtime. Even then, Lena found ways to unsettle us. She would move objects, leave little notes criticizing how we lived. She would comment on how I slept, how Eli laughed, how Noah stacked his toys. It was constant, relentless, and invisible to anyone else. I could feel my mental space shrinking, like I was trapped in a cage I couldn't escape. Then came the day I saw her checking the locked drawers. She wasn't pretending anymore. Her fingers lingered over the safe in Dad's room, whispering to herself. I froze, unsure if I should confront her or stay hidden. "Maya," she said suddenly. "Did you see that?" I shook my head. "I was just looking for blankets," she added, her voice too calm, too rehearsed. She smiled and walked away, but I knew the lie was as thin as paper. I started documenting everything. Notes, photos, times, conversations, anything that might convince Dad that Lena wasn't harmless. I even found small recordings of her muttering things under her breath, almost like she was practicing a script. The air in the house felt suffocating, and even when she was gone, her presence lingered like a shadow. One evening, after an incident with Eli where she raised her voice, I decided enough was enough. I collected my evidence and went to Dad. I laid everything out. The notebook, photos, recordings, all the little patterns that added up. He looked through them silently. Expression, unreadable. Then for the first time I saw understanding. I had no idea," he said finally. And that night, Lena left abruptly. Even then, though, peace didn't come immediately. The house felt empty but tense, like the air itself remembered her. Eli and Noah still flinched at shadows. I woke in the middle of the night, convinced I saw her in the hallway. I learned quickly that escaping her presence wasn't just physical. The trauma had rooted itself in our minds. Days passed, and slowly we began to breathe again. I watched my brothers closely, noticing when they laughed freely again, or when Eli started stacking blocks without fear. I kept locks on doors for a while, not because I expected Lena back, but because I had learned that vigilance was survival. The experience had changed me. I was no longer just 17. I was a protector, a guard of our small family unit. I also learned to trust my instincts. Before Lena, I often second-guessed my fears, thinking I was overreacting. Now, I saw that intuition is rarely wrong when it comes to people who aren't what they seem. I was careful, meticulous, and alert. Not paranoid, not anymore, just aware. Slowly, Dad began to understand too. He started asking questions, paying attention to patterns, listening to our stories instead of dismissing them. It was a small shift, but it made a world of difference. We could live in the house again without fear, though the memory of Lena remained like a bruise that didn't quite fade. I realized that boundaries are essential. We rebuilt our home one rule at a time: locked doors, clear responsibilities, and most importantly, a family that listened to each other. I had learned to speak up, to stand firm, and to act when things felt wrong, even if the adults in the room were slow to see it. Months later, life settled into a fragile normalcy. I still woke some nights imagining shadows, but I reminded myself that we were safe. I began to reclaim parts of myself that had been buried under fear: friends, hobbies, even quiet moments alone. The boys thrived under the new balance, laughing, playing, and sleeping without dread. It wasn't perfect. Memories of Lena came unbidden, sometimes triggered by a look, a smell, a sound. But I realized resilience doesn't mean forgetting. It means continuing to live fully despite scars. My responsibility had once felt like a burden, but now it became a strength. Protecting my brothers taught me courage, patience, and the importance of boundaries. By the time I graduated high school, I had learned to recognize the subtle ways people manipulate and control. I became more confident, more aware, and more assertive. Dad had become a stronger presence, more attentive, and deeply grateful for the lessons we had all endured together. I knew some dangers are hidden behind polite smiles, and some harm is invisible until it escalates. But vigilance, love, and careful observation can protect you and those you care about. I had stared fear in the face, and though it left marks, it also forged resilience, courage, and an unshakable bond between my brothers and me. We had survived, and we would continue to survive. Not because life had been easy, but because we had learned to act, to trust ourselves, and to protect our own. True courage is not the absence of fear, but the strength to act despite it. Trust your instincts, set boundaries, and protect those you love. Darkness may hide behind familiar faces, but vigilance, love, and courage can illuminate the path to safety and resilience. I was 8 years old the first time I realized that my life didn't belong to me. Mom, Samantha Harper, was a force of nature, a former ballet dancer who had once dreamed of stages, applause, and touring the world. I adored her in pieces, the way her eyes lit up when she talked about dance, the softness in her voice when she corrected my posture. But most of the time, she was a storm I couldn't escape. She enrolled me in the prestigious Lyric Performing Arts Academy before I had even finished 3rd grade. I loved to dance, yes, but I also loved sleepovers, pancakes on Saturday mornings, and catching fireflies with friends. Those were luxuries I quickly learned weren't allowed. Rehearsals, private lessons, and auditions filled every corner of my day. "Every second counts, Isabel," Mom said constantly, her voice firm but gentle, the kind that makes you nod even when your chest aches. "Your future depends on your dedication." At first, I obeyed eagerly. I wanted her approval, the faint warmth in her smiles when I executed a move perfectly. But obedience came at a cost. My social life evaporated. Friends moved on without me. Birthday parties passed without invitations, and every summer felt like a grueling marathon of drills instead of sunlit freedom. When I tried to push back, even slightly, she would sigh, shake her head, and deliver the kind of guilt that sank into your bones. "I gave up everything for you, Isabel. Everything. Do you think I did it for fun?" By the time I was 12, the rules had multiplied. Meals were meticulously measured, outfits dictated by what looked best on stage, and friendships approved by Mom's meticulous standards. Any deviation earned silent treatment, or worse, long lectures about sacrifice and commitment. I learned quickly that her love was conditional, measured by my obedience and performance. One afternoon, I begged her to let me go to a friend's birthday party. "It's just one evening," I pleaded. She set down her notebook, eyes narrowing. "One evening off schedule could ruin months of progress," she said. "Your friend will understand. Life isn't about indulgence, it's about achievement." The words were always wrapped in care, but underneath, they carried the cold weight of control. I went to my room and cried, realizing that my childhood was slipping through my fingers, replaced by lessons in discipline and relentless expectation. The academy became my entire world, but even there, the shadow of Mom's obsession followed me. I remember watching other girls laugh freely, swapping stories of birthdays and sleepovers, and feeling a pang of longing I couldn't voice. By 15, I understood something else too. Mom's ambition had become mine in name only. I performed, I competed, I smiled for her, while inside I felt like a ghost of the child I might have been. The first real crack in our carefully choreographed life came at 15, during a regional competition. I had practiced tirelessly for weeks, executing routines that left other dancers breathless. But Mom was never satisfied. "Bend that wrist more, smile wider. Remember your audience," she instructed, following me like a shadow backstage, eyes sharp, correcting every imperfection. I hated the way she watched me. Her gaze wasn't pride. It was a constant audit, measuring, recording, judging. I tried to focus, but every note of the piano, every whisper from the judges, was drowned out by the rhythm of her expectations. And then Lila Benson won the lead role. Lila, with her effortless grace, her laughter that didn't feel calculated, she beat me. Backstage, Mom's face changed. The warmth vanished, replaced by something hard, tight, and unyielding. "This isn't acceptable," she muttered, more to herself than anyone else. "No one should take what's yours." Her hands, usually soft and guiding, clenched into fists. I remember feeling a sudden chill. "I'm happy for Lila," I said, trying to mask the fear curling in my stomach. Mom didn't answer. She just fixed my costume, tightened my bun, and whispered, "We'll make this right. Don't worry, Isabel." That night she left a glass of celebratory punch on Lila's table, then waited, calm and composed, as she executed her plan. I watched in horror as the girl I considered a friend sipped it, then collapsed quietly. I froze. My stomach churned. "Mom, what did you do?" My voice barely carried. She turned to me, serene and rational. "It's done. For you. For your future." I couldn't speak. The thrill of victory I had imagined never came. Instead, there was shame, fear, and the heavy weight of complicity pressing down. After that night, nothing felt safe. I performed the lead role, each step haunted by Lila's absence. Applause felt hollow, smiles felt hollow. And Mom? She never looked back, never admitted wrongdoing, only pushed harder. Her obsession consumed her, leaving me to navigate a twisted landscape where ambition and morality collided in impossible ways. As I entered high school, the control only intensified. Mom scrutinized my every meal, my every friendship, my every breath. I became adept at hiding small acts of rebellion, stealing moments to text friends, sneaking in casual clothes when she wasn't watching. But nothing escaped her ultimate awareness. "I know what you're thinking," she would say with a calm, terrifying certainty. And she did. She always did. I remember the night she cornered me in the living room, voice soft but venomous. "You think you can have normal friends and succeed? You're wrong. You'll never reach the top without absolute dedication." I tried to argue, to say that happiness mattered too. She cut me off with a glance that silenced me, a look that drained my words before they left my mouth. "You don't understand sacrifice, Isabel. You will one day. You'll thank me." It was exhausting. Constant vigilance, constant fear, constant performance, both on stage and at home. I longed for normal teenage life, for sleepovers, for casual afternoons in the park. But those desires were treated as indulgences, weaknesses. Every act of defiance, no matter how small, brought lectures that weighed heavier than any physical punishment. Even the academy staff began noticing the strain. Whispers circulated about the girl with the intense, controlling mother, and I could see their concern in glances that lingered a moment too long. Yet Mom remained untouchable, charming, persuasive, always justifying her obsession as love, as dedication. I wanted to scream, to tell the truth, but fear anchored my tongue. The National Youth Performing Arts Competition was the breaking point. Mom hovered over me, adjusting every strand of hair, every detail of my costume, her eyes scanning for flaws only she could see. I tried to breathe, to calm myself, but her tension radiated like electricity, infecting my body. Lila was scheduled for the lead, and I felt a knot of dread tighten in my stomach. When Lila won, Mom's expression hardened. The night of the celebration, she orchestrated her plan. I watched silently, paralyzed with horror, as the consequences of her obsession unfolded. Lila collapsed. I wanted to cry out, to stop her, but Mom's calm eyes told me, "Do nothing." And I didn't. Performing the lead role felt empty. Every leap, every spin, was hollow without Lila's presence beside me. I realized, painfully, that my mother's ambition had not only destroyed innocence but had corrupted me too. I had become complicit, a witness to actions I would never forgive myself for. In the months afterward, life carried on, but nothing felt the same. Mom never admitted wrongdoing, and her obsession with perfection intensified. I learned to navigate the world carefully, hiding resentment, fear, and guilt behind polite smiles and flawless performances. My friendships suffered. My adolescence was stolen. Yet I also learned lessons about morality, resilience, and the costs of blind ambition. Eventually, I understood one truth. Love without respect and morality can become a weapon. Control masquerading as care can destroy innocence and trust. I still danced, still performed, but I did so cautiously, aware of the fine line between ambition and obsession. And I swore that if I ever became a parent, I would nurture, protect, and allow freedom. Never control, never coerce, never sacrifice a child's soul for my own unfulfilled dreams. Ambition, when twisted by obsession, can become destructive. True love nurtures, respects, and protects. It never demands control or sacrifices morality. Success at the cost of others' well-being is no success at all. I had always prided myself on my independence. Growing up in Asheville, North Carolina, I learned early that relying on myself was safer than relying on anyone else. My parents had their quirks, but for the most part, I grew up in a household where autonomy was quietly respected. College was my sanctuary, a place where I could carve out a life that belonged entirely to me. Nutrition and wellness had been my passion for as long as I could remember. There was a calm, methodical satisfaction in understanding how bodies worked, how food could heal, and how the mind was tied to every choice we made. When I met Ryan during a campus wellness seminar, I hadn't expected much beyond casual conversation, but there was something about his quiet kindness and easy laughter that made me want to know him more. Over 6 months, our friendship evolved into something deeper. We shared long walks, late-night conversations over coffee, and moments where I felt genuinely seen. So when he asked me to visit his family home in a remote countryside town, I felt a mix of excitement and nervous anticipation. He said his mother, Eleanor, was eager to meet me, and while Ryan spoke warmly about her, he also dropped vague hints about her strong personality. The drive to his family's farmhouse was longer than I'd expected. The misty hills rolled past the window, and dense pine forests loomed overhead, their shadows stretching across the narrow roads. The house itself looked like something out of a postcard, a sturdy farmhouse with peeling white paint, wide porches, and gardens that suggested careful upkeep. but there was an unsettling stillness to the surroundings that set my nerves on edge. Eleanor was waiting at the door when we arrived. She was tall, her posture perfect, with a smile that seemed rehearsed. "Vanessa, so wonderful to finally meet you," she said, her voice warm, but with an edge I couldn't place. She swept me into a hug that was firm and calculated, and I felt a slight tremor run through me. Inside, the house smelled faintly of wood polish and roast meat. Dinner was served in a dining room that gleamed with polished silverware and linen. Eleanor had prepared a lavish meal, steaks, gravy, and buttered vegetables, knowing full well I was vegetarian. I declined politely when she offered me a portion of beef. Her smile tightened and she shot a glance at Ryan. "Quirky habits," she murmured, almost too loud to be private. My stomach sank, and I forced a smile, pretending I hadn't noticed the sharpness in her tone. As the night wore on, Eleanor's control became clearer. She corrected my posture at the table, commented on my manners, and even tried to dictate small things like how I held my fork. Each remark was framed as concern, but I felt my space shrinking, the air around me tightening. When I attempted to retreat to my room, she followed, insisting she needed to help me adjust to the household. At one point, she forced a spoonful of gravy into my mouth, lecturing me on family traditions. My cheeks burned with humiliation, and a wave of fear gripped me. I realized that I was no longer in a safe space, and I wasn't sure if Ryan even saw what was happening. That night, lying in bed, I couldn't shake the feeling that Eleanor's gaze was everywhere. My mind raced, trying to figure out how to protect myself while still being polite. I had never encountered someone so manipulative, so willing to exert control under the guise of care. Sleep came fitfully, punctuated by thoughts of escape and the uncomfortable realization that I might need to act sooner than I ever imagined. Morning brought no relief. Eleanor was already in the kitchen when I stepped down, humming softly, preparing a breakfast that smelled overwhelmingly of bacon and eggs. "Morning, dear," she said, her tone saccharine. I smiled weakly, feeling trapped. I tried to keep conversation neutral, but every answer seemed to invite critique. "Too little protein for a young woman," she said, peering at my oatmeal. I explained that I was vegetarian. Her eyes narrowed. "Vegetarian? How will you ever fit in here?" Ryan seemed oblivious. He poured himself coffee, chatting about plans for the day. Eleanor leaned closer to me. "You'll get used to it eventually. This is a family home. We have our ways." She smiled as if the words were innocent, but I felt a chill. It wasn't just advice, it was control, and it was deliberate. Throughout the day, Eleanor's presence was suffocating. She hovered when I tried to read in the living room, commented on the way I folded towels, the way I walked across the floor. Every movement felt monitored, every gesture analyzed. I started noticing small things: doors locked when I wasn't looking, cupboards bolted shut. It was subtle, but my instinct screamed that this was intentional. I tried to find refuge in Ryan, but he seemed caught between his mother and me. He laughed off her comments, saying, "She's just eccentric. Don't take it personally." But I could see the tension behind his eyes. It wasn't that he didn't care. He just didn't realize the danger until it escalated. By nightfall, Eleanor's behavior had become outright aggressive. She cornered me in the hallway, lecturing me about family customs while holding a spoonful of gravy like a weapon. I flinched instinctively, feeling a mix of fear and disbelief. This was no longer subtle manipulation. It was domination. I realized then that politeness or patience wouldn't protect me. I needed a plan to get out. That night, I lay awake, listening to the creak of the house, the faint rustle of the wind in the pines. My mind replayed every interaction, every sharp glance, every forced smile. I couldn't predict Eleanor's next move, and that uncertainty made her power even more dangerous. I thought about driving away, but the roads were unfamiliar, the house so remote. Yet every instinct in my body screamed that staying could be harmful, and maybe more than emotionally. I waited for an opportunity. Ryan, deep in sleep, was my only chance. I crept into the kitchen, careful not to wake Eleanor, and grabbed his car keys. The air was thick with fog as I slipped out into the early morning. My hands shook on the wheel as I navigated the winding country roads, my mind replaying every detail, every subtle threat Eleanor had made. Fear coursed through me, but so did a strange sense of empowerment. I was reclaiming control. The drive felt endless, the mist wrapping around the trees like ghosts watching my escape. I kept thinking about Eleanor's face, that controlled smile that didn't reach her eyes. What had compelled her to treat me that way? Was it jealousy? Fear of losing her son? Or something darker? I didn't know, and I didn't want to. What mattered was that I was getting out. By the time I reached the city, exhaustion hit me like a wave. I parked in front of my apartment, shaking and silent. The sense of relief was immediate but fragile. I knew I couldn't ignore what had happened. It wasn't a one-time incident. Eleanor's obsessive control wasn't a quirk, it was a pattern of domination. The next days were filled with anxiety and reflection. I confronted Ryan gently, explaining why I had left. He was shocked and hurt, but started to understand that his mother's behavior wasn't harmless eccentricity. Therapy became a lifeline, helping me process the fear, humiliation, and confusion I felt. I learned to set boundaries, to trust my instincts, and to recognize manipulative behavior, even when it hides behind affection or concern. Life after the escape wasn't easy. I struggled to reconcile my feelings for Ryan with the knowledge of his mother's actions. Visits were off limits, and I spent months rebuilding my sense of safety. I became hyper-aware of power dynamics in relationships, noticing the subtle ways someone might control or dominate another person. My friendships deepened as I learned to communicate openly and to trust my instincts rather than dismiss them. One night, I had a dream about Eleanor standing in the kitchen smiling. I woke up in a panic, my heart racing, and realized that trauma leaves lingering shadows. But each day I reclaimed autonomy. Small victories like cooking my favorite meal or taking a long walk alone helped diminish her presence in my mind. I understood that survival isn't just about escaping physically. It's about rebuilding mental and emotional space. Time passed, and Ryan and I eventually parted ways. He remained kind but cautious, learning the hard way that blind trust in family can be dangerous. I continued my studies in nutrition and wellness, now with a deeper understanding of boundaries, consent, and emotional health. I shared my story with close friends, helping others recognize the signs of manipulation and control before it escalates. Through it all, I learned that independence isn't just a trait, it's a necessity when navigating relationships that test your limits. Eleanor's shadow may linger in memory, but it no longer dictates my actions. I walk forward with awareness, caution, and strength, knowing that autonomy and self-respect are not negotiable. True independence and emotional safety come from trusting your instincts and setting clear boundaries. Manipulation often hides behind affection, kindness, or family loyalty, but recognizing and resisting control protects both your mind and body. Respect and care should never come at the cost of your autonomy. I had always thought of our cabin in the Vermont hills as a sanctuary, a place where the air smelled like pine and cedar, where mornings came with the soft hum of rustling leaves and birdsong. It wasn't a sprawling estate, just a modest cedar home Marcus and I had built together before I became pregnant. The creaking floors and the gentle sway of the old wood gave it character, made it feel alive. Yet, as the months passed and my belly grew heavy with our first child, the isolation that once comforted me began to gnaw at my nerves. Marcus had been a forest ranger for over a decade. His job required vigilance and long hours, patrolling trails, checking on wildlife, and sometimes dealing with emergencies in areas so remote that self-service was non-existent. I loved him for his dedication, but with each call that took him farther from home, I felt a creeping anxiety that I tried to suppress. I knew that fear was a part of motherhood, a biological tug toward protecting life that wasn't yet born. Still, the reality of being 38 weeks pregnant and alone in the middle of the misty hills made my chest tighten in ways I hadn't expected. The first sign that tonight would be different came just before dusk. I had been in the kitchen, sipping a cup of herbal tea, when I noticed headlights slicing through the fog. A black van, unmarked, rolled slowly down our gravel driveway. My dog, Rusty, a golden retriever with an uncanny sense of danger, growled low, hackles raised. I peered through the window, heart skipping a beat. The van stopped, and 4 men stepped out. They didn't wave or hesitate. They moved with a deliberate confidence, heading straight for our cabin. "Rusty, stay," I whispered, but he bolted toward the door, barking furiously. The knock came seconds later, a solid thump that shook the doorframe. "Hello? Anyone home?" a voice called, though it carried no friendliness. I backed away slowly, heart hammering, my hand brushing the small crowbar I kept by the door for emergencies. My fingers trembled as I realized just how alone I truly was. 40 miles to the nearest hospital, my phone barely had a signal, and my husband was hours away. I retreated to the basement, dragging Rusty with me, and barricaded the door with a heavy shelf. Shadows moved above, muffled voices, laughter that sounded too loud for friendly visitors. Panic surged through me, my breathing shallow, every muscle tense. The men began pounding on the basement door, taunting me, calling my name as if they knew I was there. I gripped the crowbar with sweaty palms, realizing that this wasn't just fear, it was survival instinct. Every fiber of my body screamed to protect myself and the life growing inside me. Time slowed. Each second felt drawn out, and yet, it passed too quickly. The pounding became relentless. Rusty lunged at the bottom of the door, teeth snapping, growls vibrating through his chest. I swung the crowbar at every attempt to push through. My mind raced through strategies Marcus had taught me for emergencies. Stay calm, stay mobile, use every advantage. But the uncertainty of how far these men would go made me feel trapped, powerless. And then, through the haze of fear, came the unmistakable sound of Marcus's voice, calling my name, rifle in hand. The intruders scattered into the foggy night, leaving me trembling, Rusty whining and circling my legs. Relief washed over me in a wave, but it didn't erase the terror I had felt. The reality settled in. I had been vulnerable, and if Marcus had been delayed another hour, the outcome might have been different. That night I lay in bed with Rusty pressed to my side, eyes wide in the dark, knowing that the illusion of safety had been shattered forever. The morning sunlight didn't bring comfort, only a lingering tension. Marcus brewed coffee quietly, eyes distant as he observed the aftermath of the previous night. I tried to sip my tea calmly, but my hands shook and my stomach churned, admitted, my voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know how I let that happen. I thought I could handle it, but..." I froze. He reached over, placing his hand over mine. "You didn't freeze," he said firmly. "You survived. You protected yourself. Rusty helped, and you stayed alive. That's not freezing, that's instinct." His words were meant to soothe, but the memory of the pounding on the basement door refused to fade. Every corner of the cabin felt different now, shadows deeper, silence louder. I realized that the place I had once thought of as a haven now carried the weight of potential danger. Over the next few days, Marcus helped me fortify the cabin. We installed reinforced locks on every door, motion sensor alarms along the perimeter, and even cameras near the driveway. Every adjustment felt both reassuring and suffocating. The very measures meant to give me security also reminded me of how fragile that safety was. I began sleeping with Rusty close to the bed, crowbar at the ready, and checking the windows multiple times a night. The psychological toll was subtle at first, manifesting in moments of hesitation, pausing before opening the door, flinching at a shadow, jumping at every unfamiliar sound. Marcus noticed the change and gently reminded me that some fear was natural, that preparing for our baby meant preparing for anything. But it wasn't just preparation. It was vigilance, a constant hum beneath every activity, a subtle shift in how I interacted with the world. Even simple tasks became exercises in caution. Fetching water from the stream, checking the propane tanks, or walking Rusty after sunset carried a heightened awareness. Every sound in the forest, the snap of a twig, a rustle in the brush, made my pulse spike. Marcus tried to ease my fears, teaching me how to move quietly, how to scan for threats. But I could sense that even his calm presence didn't erase the memory of the intruders. Isolation had always been a part of cabin life, but now it felt different. It was no longer peaceful. It was potential danger waiting to happen. Every glance toward the foggy hills reminded me that the world outside our walls could intrude without warning. And with our baby on the way, that possibility carried a heavier weight. I began practicing escape routes, checking emergency kits, and rehearsing mental drills in case of another intrusion. One evening, as rain pelted the roof in rhythmic thumps, I sat with Rusty at the window, watching the forest blur into shadows. Marcus had been away on a late patrol, leaving me alone for a few hours. I felt the familiar tension coiling in my chest, an instinctive preparation for danger. Memories of the van and the pounding on the basement door returned in flashes. I realized that the fear had become embedded, an ever-present companion that I could neither shake nor ignore. I practiced mental exercises, imagining worst-case scenarios and planning my responses. Where would I go? How could I protect myself and the baby? I reinforced the basement door again, placed heavy furniture strategically, and even tested the crowbar's balance for maximum effectiveness. Rusty stayed close, alert and protective, as if he understood that the stakes had shifted from ordinary survival to maternal defense. The hours stretched slowly, and when Marcus finally returned, I felt an immense relief. He noticed the changes, the way I moved with caution, how my eyes scanned the woods constantly. "You're preparing," he said quietly. "That's good. That's smart." I nodded, but inside I knew it went beyond preparation. It was vigilance born from fear, a constant undercurrent that would follow me through pregnancy, childbirth, and parenthood. Weeks passed. The baby's movements became a reminder of why every precaution mattered. Each kick was a pulse of life I needed to protect, an anchor to the present. Marcus and I developed routines, locking doors, checking alarms, ensuring emergency supplies were always at hand. I still had moments of vulnerability, small panics when I heard an unfamiliar sound outside, or imagined eyes watching from the mist. But each time I breathed, assessed, and acted. Fear had taught me caution, and caution had taught me empowerment. I no longer felt helpless. I felt prepared. The night our child was born, I held the baby in my arms, feeling an overwhelming sense of protection and purpose. All the fear, all the sleepless nights, the drills and alarms, they had led me here. Marcus stood beside me holding my hand, our eyes meeting in quiet understanding. The cabin, once a source of fear, now represented resilience, preparation, and the bond of family. I realized that fear is not weakness. It is a signal, a guide. It drives us to prepare, to protect, and to grow stronger. The experience had changed me, reshaped my understanding of safety, vigilance, and love. I had faced vulnerability and come through it, stronger and more attuned to the world around me. Fear can be a powerful teacher. When harnessed wisely, it fosters vigilance, preparation, and protective instincts, turning vulnerability into strength. True safety is not the absence of danger. It is the conscious readiness to face it, coupled with the courage to act decisively to protect yourself and those you love. I was 7 years old, the kind of age when the world felt big but mostly safe. I lived in Santa Fe, New Mexico, a city of warm sun, dusty red streets, and wide-open skies. I loved the park near our apartment, a small oasis of green with swings, slides, and the smell of blooming flowers in the spring. Most afternoons I could spend hours there, running around until my mother called me back for dinner. The park was my world, a place where curiosity and imagination felt safe and boundless. My mother, Clara, worked long hours as a nurse at the local hospital, but she always made time for me. She taught me to notice details in the world, to pay attention to strangers, and to ask questions when something didn't feel right. I was careful, polite, and trusting in the right circumstances. I liked meeting people, especially adults who smiled warmly and seemed kind. I didn't know that kindness could sometimes hide danger. It started on a bright Saturday afternoon. The sun was warm on my shoulders, and I was building a sandcastle near the swings when a woman approached. She looked friendly, dressed in soft colors, and introduced herself as Margaret. "Hi, Lydia," she said, her voice gentle and soothing. "I'm a friend of your mother's. She asked me to take you to meet my family. Would you like to come?" I hesitated. I didn't remember my mother mentioning this friend, but Margaret's smile was inviting, and something about the way she spoke made me think my mother would approve. "Are you sure Mommy said it's okay?" I asked, my small voice wavering. "Oh yes," she said, kneeling to my level. "She's very busy today, and we thought it would be fun to have a little adventure. Just you and me." I glanced at the swings, the empty park, and then at Margaret's eager expression. My curiosity won. I followed her to her car, a dark sedan parked nearby. Rustling of the wind through the trees and the distant laughter of children masked the tension I didn't yet feel. As we drove, the scenery changed from familiar streets to winding desert roads. The buildings thinned, replaced by rocky hills and scrubby bushes. I noticed Margaret's grip tightening on the steering wheel, and the way her eyes darted at every passing car. She ignored a stop sign, muttered under her breath, and then laughed nervously, a sound that didn't match her calm demeanor earlier. Something felt off, but I didn't know what to do. I trusted her, or I thought I did. When we stopped at a gas station, a man approached us. "Hey, are you with the child?" he asked, frowning. "There's a report about a missing girl around here." My stomach tightened. Margaret's face changed instantly. She looked furious, her hands clenching, and before I could react, she pulled a hammer from under her seat and struck the man. I screamed, frozen as she dragged me back into the car, locking the doors. I didn't understand why someone I had trusted could hurt another person, or why I was being taken further into danger. My mind raced, trying to piece together the situation. She whispered in a low voice, "Don't be afraid, Lydia. You're going to be mine now." The words didn't make sense, and yet her tone carried a weight that silenced me. That was the first time I realized that the world wasn't always safe, and that sometimes even adults could be terrifying. The drive continued, the desert stretching endlessly on either side. Margaret's hands trembled as she gripped the wheel, her lips pressed tight, and I felt the fear growing inside me. I didn't know how to escape, didn't know if anyone knew where I was. My thoughts spun, recalling everything my mother had taught me about strangers. Stay calm, ask questions, look for help, but nothing seemed possible now. She tried talking to me as if nothing had happened, asking about my favorite colors, my school, my friends. Her words sounded like a lullaby, soft and melodic, but I could feel the tension in her movements. Every glance in the rearview mirror reminded me that I was trapped, that this woman had intentions I didn't understand. I tried to make small requests, hoping to appeal to her sense of reason. "Can we stop somewhere?" I asked. "I need to call my mom." She shook her head sharply. "No, Lydia, we can't. It's just you and me now. I've been waiting for this." Her voice was calm, almost hypnotic, but I could sense something dangerous beneath it. I realized gradually that she wasn't taking me to meet her family. She had a plan, a motive that had nothing to do with friendship or kindness. My pulse quickened. I wasn't sure what to do, but I knew I had to stay alert. When she stopped at another station, hoping for gas and a quick snack, a passerby recognized the situation and asked pointedly about the missing child report. Margaret's face hardened instantly, and she lashed out violently, attacking him with a hammer and dragging me back into the car. I squeezed my eyes shut, heart racing, unable to understand why someone would be so cruel. The fear was overwhelming, and I couldn't stop crying. In the quiet moments of the drive afterward, Margaret talked about herself. She had lost a child years ago, she said, and had been searching for someone to fill that void ever since. Every word, every sentence was laced with obsession and grief. She projected her loss onto me, speaking as if I was meant to replace her child. I didn't respond, only listening, the weight of confusion and terror pressing down on me. The desert seemed endless, the horizon blurring in the heat waves. I tried to memorize details, the shape of the hills, road signs, gas stations, anything that might help authorities track us. I didn't know if it would work, but clinging to small thoughts gave me a sense of control in a situation where I had none. Margaret had made me her object, her replacement for something she had lost, and I could feel the suffocating grip of her obsession pressing closer with every mile. Eventually, police had tracked the car, moving ahead to block exits, while helicopters hovered above. I could see flashing lights in the distance, though Margaret didn't seem to notice, or she pretended not to. Fear twisted inside me, a mix of relief and terror. Relief that help was near, terror at what she might do if we were caught. She muttered to herself, gripping the wheel tighter, her eyes wild. I whispered prayers, gripping the seat as tightly as I could, trying to make myself small, hoping she wouldn't notice my awareness of the approaching authorities. Finally, the car slowed, surrounded by police vehicles. Margaret panicked, attempting to escape, but it was futile. Officers pulled her from the vehicle, restraining her as I was guided out, crying and shaking but alive. The cool evening air hit my face, sharp and real, and for the first time in hours I felt a flicker of safety. Rustling voices, commands, and the smell of uniforms surrounded me, but I clung to a single thought. I was free. As they asked questions, I realized how close I had come to danger, how easily someone could exploit trust, charm, or kindness to achieve obsession-driven goals. I didn't understand all the details, but I understood the principle. Vigilance and awareness matter, even for children. Adults could be dangerous, and not all intentions were pure, even if they were wrapped in a friendly smile. In the following weeks, life returned to a semblance of normalcy, though the shadow of fear lingered. My mother strengthened boundaries at the park and in daily life, teaching me to recognize red flags, to ask questions, and to assert personal safety. I learned to trust my instincts, even when someone seemed kind, and to understand that fear can be a signal to act. Therapy sessions helped me process the terror and confusion. I learned that Margaret's actions were not about me. They were about her grief, obsession, and desire for control. Understanding this helped me separate my sense of self from the trauma. I realized that while I had been vulnerable, my resilience had allowed me to survive and recover. Months later, I returned to the park, hesitant at first, Rusty by my side. The sun shone bright over the red city streets, and I remembered the fear, the panic, the feeling of being trapped. But I also remembered the way I survived, the way my instincts guided me, and the love and vigilance my mother had shown. I began to play again, slowly, cautiously, aware but unafraid to reclaim my space. The incident had changed me. I learned that trust must be earned and that awareness is not paranoia. It is survival. I understood that some people carry obsessions and grief so deep that they can project it onto others, and that even innocence must be shielded. But I also discovered that resilience, guidance, and careful vigilance could restore a sense of safety and empowerment. Trust is essential but must be tempered with awareness. Obsession and grief can drive individuals to manipulate and control others, even innocent children, and vigilance is crucial for safety. Empowerment comes from recognizing red flags, asserting boundaries, and learning that resilience and guidance can overcome fear and restore a sense of security. I still remember the first time Sunrise Market felt both magical and frightening. It was June 2015, a bright Saturday morning, and my mom and I had walked down Briarwood Lane in Minneapolis to the little corner store she frequented. I was 7, tall for my age, curious about everything and easily distracted. The aisles were a wonderland, colorful candy jars lined at my eye level, small toys stacked on low shelves, and the faint smell of fresh bread mixed with packaged snacks. Mom was already lost somewhere between the produce section and the snack aisle, and I wandered a little further than I should have, drawn toward the small toy display near the back. I loved toys, plastic animals, tiny dolls, puzzles I could solve in a few minutes. My fingers hovered over a small model car when I noticed a man approaching. He was in his 40s, wearing a worn windbreaker and a baseball cap that shadowed his eyes. At first he smiled, and I felt a strange mix of curiosity and caution. "Hey there," he said softly. "Want to see a special toy? Just back here." My stomach tightened. I didn't know why, but something about his voice and the way he leaned slightly closer made my skin crawl. I called out for Mom, my voice trembling. "Mom!" I shouted. She didn't hear me, still absorbed in her shopping. The man paused, pretending to examine the shelf behind him, but I could feel his eyes on me. I knew I needed to stay alert. A few minutes passed, and he eventually wandered off when he realized I wasn't going to follow him. My small victory made me feel a little braver, but the incident left a lingering unease. I stuck closer to Mom as we walked through the snack aisle, eyeing the entrance and exit, noting the positions of the employees behind the counter. Something in me had shifted. I understood, in a very basic way, that even familiar spaces could suddenly become dangerous. Later, as Mom checked out, I decided to use the restroom at the far corner of the store. I thought I was safe, that the encounter with the man was over. But then, unexpectedly, he appeared behind me. My heart leapt into my throat. His hand covered my mouth, and I felt him trying to pull me toward the storage area. Panic exploded inside me, but instinct took over. I bit his hand as hard as I could, twisting and jerking while screaming for my mom. A cashier nearby noticed my cries immediately and rushed over. "Hey, get away from her!" she shouted. The man, startled, loosened his grip and fled. I ran into my mom's arms, shaking, tears streaming down my cheeks. Security footage later confirmed his presence, but he had vanished before the police arrived. That day changed the way I saw small stores, the way I approached strangers, and the way I understood my own intuition. What had seemed ordinary, the aisles, the candy jars, the soft hum of the fluorescent lights, suddenly carried a potential for danger. Even at 7, I knew I had experienced something serious, something that would teach me lessons I carried into adulthood. In the weeks that followed, Sunrise Market became a place I avoided whenever possible. I would grip Mom's hand tightly whenever we shopped, scanning every aisle for unfamiliar adults and watching every movement with suspicion. Even ordinary tasks, choosing cereal, picking snacks, felt tense. My imagination filled in the gaps, turning simple shoppers into potential threats. Mom tried to reassure me. "Sweetie, it was just one man. Most people aren't like that," she said gently. But I didn't care about statistics. I cared about survival, about keeping myself safe. My 7-year-old brain had learned a hard truth. Even the most ordinary, familiar places could conceal danger. I began noticing details I'd never considered before. The way people lingered near the corners, the subtle way some adults watched children more than necessary, the distances between aisles that allowed for sudden approach. My heightened awareness became second nature. At school, I was more cautious about who I spoke to, how I navigated playgrounds, and how I walked home. One day, my teacher noticed my tension and asked what was wrong. I hesitated, unsure how to explain a fear rooted in a single frightening encounter, but eventually I told her the story. She listened carefully, nodded, and said, "It's good that you trusted your instincts. That's how you stay safe." Those words resonated with me. I realized that fear, while uncomfortable, was also a tool. It guided me toward action that could prevent harm. By the summer, I started to understand my reactions better. When we walked past stores, I wasn't just scanning for threats out of paranoia. I was practicing situational awareness. I learned to notice exits, the positions of employees, and how crowded a space was. I began to understand the subtle cues that indicated potential danger: a lingering gaze, unusual gestures, or someone trying to isolate a child. Mom noticed my caution but also encouraged me. "You don't have to be afraid all the time," she said. "Just be smart and aware." Her words became a kind of mantra. I knew I couldn't control the world, but I could control how I responded to it. By the time school started again in the fall, I felt more empowered even at 7. I could walk confidently, aware of my surroundings, and trust my gut when something felt wrong. The man from Sunrise Market was never caught, but the lessons I learned that day stayed with me. Awareness and action could prevent harm, even if luck didn't always favor you. Years passed, and my understanding of that morning deepened. By middle school, I had internalized the principles of safety, awareness, and assertiveness. When I walked through stores, I carried a mental checklist. Where were the exits? How crowded was the store? Who was paying attention to me and who seemed out of place? I wasn't paranoid. I was prepared. The lessons from Sunrise Market also extended to my relationships. I became protective of younger children in my family, especially my niece. Shopping trips were never casual. I held her hand firmly, kept her close in aisles, and watched other shoppers with a quiet vigilance. I realized that teaching others how to respect boundaries and recognize danger was part of staying safe myself. One summer, when my niece was 5, we visited a small market downtown. A man approached her, smiling too broadly, asking if she wanted to see something special. My body reacted instantly. I stepped in, placing myself between him and her, and said firmly, "She's with me. Step back." The man hesitated, then left. My niece looked up at me, wide-eyed. "What was that?" she asked. I smiled softly. "Just being careful." That day, I realized that my past fear had transformed into empowerment. My experiences had taught me vigilance, assertiveness, and the importance of trusting instincts. The memory of Sunrise Market wasn't just about trauma, it was a blueprint for resilience. By high school, I had also learned to balance awareness with normalcy. I could enter stores, walk the streets, and interact with strangers without constant panic. The fear was there, yes, but it was measured, informative, and manageable. I had grown capable of recognizing threats, responding appropriately, and protecting both myself and those I cared about. College brought new challenges. Living in Minneapolis independently, I frequently navigated crowded stores, unfamiliar neighborhoods, and public transit. The lessons from Sunrise Market remained essential. I carried a small whistle in my backpack, kept my phone ready, and trusted my gut when situations felt off. One evening, while shopping alone in a local market near my dorm, a man tried to follow me into the narrow aisles. My pulse spiked, but I didn't panic. I positioned myself near the checkout, maintained eye contact, and spoke firmly. "Excuse me, can you move back?" I said, voice steady. He paused, muttered something, and left. The small victory reinforced a critical truth. Preparedness and assertiveness often deterred danger more effectively than fear or avoidance alone. Through college, I shared these lessons with friends, especially younger students. I emphasized awareness, trust in instinct, and the importance of vocalizing concerns. Many dismissed these conversations at first, but over time they acknowledged their value. My experiences became more than personal. They became practical guidance for others navigating urban spaces. Now, as an adult, I take my niece and other young family members shopping regularly. I scan aisles, watch entrances, and subtly teach them to recognize boundaries and trust instincts. I carry the lessons from that morning at Sunrise Market with me, a reminder that ordinary places can unexpectedly become threatening. I also recognize the resilience those experiences instilled. Fear, when acknowledged and managed, becomes empowerment. Awareness turns vulnerability into preparedness. Assertiveness transforms hesitation into safety. I understand that danger is sometimes unavoidable, but How we respond defines the outcome. Trust your instincts, respect your boundaries, and don't underestimate the lessons small moments of fear can teach. Awareness and action are tools, not paranoia. Ordinary places can become unsafe, but knowledge, vigilance, and courage ensure that safety is never entirely out of reach. I used to think our house was normal. Pale blue siding, white porch railing, cedar trees that smelled sweet after rain. From the outside, it looked peaceful, the kind of home people drive past and think, a family lives there. They'd be right, technically. There was a family inside, me and my father, Martin Rains. But what went on behind those windows wasn't peaceful. It was ritual. Every morning started at 5. My father would knock on my door, soft but sharp. "Evan, it's time." I'd stumble out of bed, rubbing my eyes, and meet him at the dining table. 2 plates, 1 Bible, 1 candle burning in the middle like we were dining with God himself. "Repeat the verse," he'd say, voice low and calm. If I yawned, he'd start again from the top. If I hesitated, he'd say, "The word doesn't wait for the lazy, son." We'd go through an hour of prayer before breakfast, before I even looked outside. Afterward, he'd hand me a list. Chores, scripture study, sometimes just lines from sermons I had to copy into my notebook. Repetition builds faith, he'd remind me. My friends, well, I didn't have any. He never allowed visitors, no phone, no TV, no internet. He said the outside world was infected with lies. So I stayed inside and listened to him. For years. When I was little, I used to ask about Mom. Her name was Sarah, though Dad never said it out loud. He'd just tighten his jaw and quote, "A woman must be faithful to her home." I didn't understand then, but I do now. The only thing I knew was that she left when I was 6. That's what he told me anyway. She didn't fit God's design for this family. He said it with such conviction I almost believed him. Still, sometimes at night when the wind hit the cedar branches just right, I swore I could hear a woman humming. A soft, distant lullaby, one I'd never heard before but somehow knew was meant for me. It started with dust. A Saturday afternoon in May, sun bleeding through the blinds. Dad told me to clean the attic while he prepared for Sunday's reflection night. I hated the attic, the smell of mildew, the faint scurrying of mice in the corners. I was halfway through sweeping when I saw a brown paper bundle wedged between boxes of Christmas lights. I pulled it out, coughing as the dust flew. Inside was a photo album, cracked leather old as time. The first page stopped me cold. My mother, young, smiling, holding a baby wrapped in a blue blanket. Me. Her eyes were kind, not like the way Dad described her. As I turned the pages, my stomach twisted. Her face was blacked out in every later photo, thick marker strokes carved into the paper. In one, she stood beside Dad, and he was holding the same Bible he still carried every morning. It looked like a family until it didn't. When Dad came home, I tried to sound casual. "Hey, Dad," I said. "I found some old photos upstairs." He froze mid-step. His eyes flicked to the attic door, then back to me. "Photos?" His voice stayed calm, but something in it shifted. "Yeah, just, me and Mom. You guys looked happy." He set his Bible on the counter and walked toward me. "Evan," he said softly, "some people don't know when to stop asking questions." I tried to laugh. I didn't mean anything, I was just... Curiosity is the enemy of faith. His tone hardened, but his smile never changed. That was worse than shouting. The next day, the album was gone. So was the brown paper. When I asked, he said he'd disposed of temptation. That night, the humming outside my window sounded louder. Only this time, I didn't think it was the wind. 2 weeks later, he woke me before dawn. "Get dressed," he said. "We're going for a drive." He never liked driving. Said cars made people lazy. So when he told me to grab my coat, I felt my stomach twist. We drove past the city, past familiar gas stations and stoplights until the houses thinned out and the road turned to gravel. I watched the cedar trees blur by, the silence stretching like wire between us. Finally, he pulled over beside a clearing. The air smelled like dirt and rain. "Evan," he said, hands resting on the steering wheel, "you're almost a man now, old enough to understand what family loyalty means." He got out, opened the trunk. I followed slowly. Inside were my mother's things, a necklace, a red sweater, a camera, all neatly folded. He touched the sweater like it was sacred. "She broke the circle," he said. But I forgave her. I always forgive. My heart pounded. "Dad, what do you mean?" He looked up. His eyes were glassy, calm. "She wanted to leave. She thought she could hide from God. But God doesn't lose his flock." The way he said it made my skin crawl. I stared at the dirt by his boots. Fresh, dark, disturbed. "Dad, we should go," I whispered. He smiled faintly. "Don't be afraid, son. Faith demands sacrifice." The ride home was silent. I kept my eyes on the window, counting mailboxes, memorizing turns. When we got back, he went to the basement to reflect. The door closed. The lock clicked. I sat in my room, shaking, clutching the old camera I'd taken from the trunk. It was heavy, too heavy, like it carried truth inside it. I didn't sleep that night. The house was too quiet. Even the creak of the floorboards seemed afraid to speak. I waited until the clock hit midnight, Dad's prayer hour. I could hear him downstairs whispering verses between the hum of the furnace. I stuffed a few clothes into my backpack, grabbed the camera, and crept toward the front door. But as my hand reached the knob, I heard a sound from the basement. A voice. Faint. Trembling. A woman's. I froze. My breath caught in my throat. "Please," she whispered. "Don't let him—" A sharp thud cut her off. Then silence. Then Dad's voice, calm, low, reciting Psalm 51. I ran. The screen door slammed behind me, and I sprinted barefoot down Willow Street. The air was cold and raw against my skin, the gravel cutting into my feet. I didn't look back, not until I reached the main road. A pair of headlights approached. A truck. I waved frantically. The driver, an older man, slowed down. "Kid, you okay?" I just kept saying, "He's not right. My dad's not right." The police came the next morning. I told them everything. The prayers, the rules, the photos, the trunk. They didn't say much while I spoke, just nodded and wrote things down. When they searched the house, they found the basement spotless. Fresh bleach, tools organized, floors scrubbed to bone-white shine. No woman, no body, no blood. But behind the cedar trees, the same ones that hummed at night, the soil was freshly turned, 6 feet wide, 2 feet deep. Dad was gone. They issued alerts, searched neighboring counties, but he'd vanished like mist. The camera I brought them had photos inside, old ones of me, Mom, and one I'd never taken, me asleep in my bed, shot through my window. Months later, I was in foster care, learning how to breathe again. I'd wake some nights to the sound of a car engine idling outside, but by the time I looked, the street was empty. Then one morning, a letter arrived. No return address. Inside was a photo. Me, sleeping in my new room. On the back, written in his handwriting, "The circle is never broken, son. I moved again. I still check my windows every night. Sometimes I dream of cedar branches swaying and a voice saying softly, 'Family is forever.' And every time, I wake up praying that's a lie. Blind obedience can disguise the darkest evils. Family should never demand silence, fear, or submission in the name of love. True faith, true loyalty. They thrive only in freedom, not control. Trust your doubts. Sometimes questioning is the only thing that keeps you alive." I still remember the night I met Harold Pierce, though I've tried my best to forget it. It was late December of 2017, and Maine was drowning in snow. The kind that doesn't just fall, it devours. I'd been living out of my car for almost 3 months, sleeping in the back seat with my coat pulled over me like a blanket. The diner I worked at barely paid enough for gas and soup. But I kept going, 1 cup of coffee at a time. That Sunday night, the highway was nearly empty. The world outside was white and soundless, like the whole planet had frozen mid-breath. I was serving the last of the truckers when he walked in. Middle-aged, tall, clean-shaven, wearing a wool coat and a gentle smile. His eyes were the color of faded denim. "Evenin', miss," he said, setting his gloves on the counter. "Cold one out there, huh?" "Coldest of the year," I replied, forcing a smile. I was tired, but his calm voice carried warmth. He ordered black coffee and a slice of apple pie, tipped $20 on a $5 bill. Over the next few weeks, he became a regular, always in the same booth, always at closing time. I started to look forward to those quiet moments. He'd ask about my day, tell small-town jokes, quote scripture sometimes, and end each conversation with, "Stay warm, Lena. The Lord looks after wanderers." He never flirted, never made me feel uneasy. That's what made me trust him. When my car broke down during a snowstorm one night after work, I sat crying in the freezing dark, steam rising from the hood like smoke from a dying beast. I didn't even see his headlights until he was already pulling over. "Lena?" he said, stepping out. "Are you hurt?" I shook my head. "No, just stranded." "Well?" He smiled softly. "No one should freeze to death trying to make it home. Come on, I live just off County Road 47. I'll drive you there. Got a spare room and hot stew waiting." Every instinct screamed, no, but desperation has a way of quieting instincts. The wind bit through my jacket, and the snow was falling too thick to see. So I nodded. His farmhouse sat like a ghost on a hill surrounded by white woods and silence. He parked in front of the porch, helped me with my bag, and led me inside. The warmth hit me like a drug. The place was old but spotless. Polished pine floors, lace curtains, and pictures on the wall. Portraits of a woman and a young girl. His wife and daughter, he said. They went to be with God a few years back. He made me tea and we talked by the fireplace. His voice was slow, almost melodic. Before I went to bed, he said with a strange tenderness, "Lena, dear, one small rule. Never open the basement door. That's where the house keeps its past." He smiled, but the light in his eyes dimmed a little when he said it. I thought he was joking. I laughed. He didn't. The next morning I woke to the sound of a piano, soft, almost mournful. The melody drifted through the hallway like smoke. I followed it to the living room, where Harold sat playing, eyes closed, lips moving silently. When he noticed me, he stopped and smiled. "Morning, sleepyhead," he said. "Breakfast's ready. Hope you like eggs and toast." The smell was heavenly, but something about the scene felt too staged. Everything in that house had its place. The books, the silverware, even the cushions were aligned perfectly. I tried to ignore it. Days passed with strange repetition. He'd wake me at dawn with the same hymn. We'd eat together, pray, and he'd talk endlessly about faith, purity, and obedience. I'd help him shovel snow, clean dishes, or read old church bulletins he collected. But he never stopped watching me. Every movement, every word. Once I locked my bedroom door before sleeping. The next morning it was open. When I confronted him, he smiled gently. "Trust builds safety, Lena. Locks build walls." I didn't argue, but something in his tone, it wasn't fatherly, it was possessive. That night I heard something beneath the floor, a faint hum, then a soft clank, like metal brushing metal. The sound came from the basement. The next morning, Harold was scrubbing the kitchen tiles on his knees. His hands were raw, red, bleeding. "You okay?" I asked, stepping closer. He didn't look up. "Sin leaves stains, dear. Some stains take longer to clean." I tried to laugh it off, but the smell of bleach burned my nose. Later, I noticed something else. A flicker of light under the basement door, around 2 a.m. I'd see it every night, like a candle glowing through the crack. Once, curiosity almost got me. I stood in front of that door, hand on the knob, heart hammering. But before I turned it, I heard his voice down the hall. "Lena, obedience brings safety." I froze. He was standing there in the dark, Bible in hand, smiling. I didn't sleep that night. By the end of the second week, my nerves were shot. Every sound made me jump. I needed to leave, but the storm had buried the roads again. The phone lines were down, and Harold said the snowplow wouldn't come for days. He acted like everything was normal. I acted like I believed him. One afternoon, while he was out chopping wood, I searched the house for a phone signal. Nothing, just static. In his study, I found old photos, not of his wife and daughter, but different girls, dozens of them, some smiling, some not. None looked older than me. Then I heard it, a faint drip, drip, drip from below, the basement. I shouldn't have gone near it, but something inside me, fear or maybe instinct, pushed me. The door was locked, but the key hung on a hook near the pantry. My hands shook as I turned it. The smell hit first, bleach and rust. Then came the sound, soft, wet, and human. "Hello?" I whispered. A sob answered. I stepped down slowly, flashlight trembling in my grip. The concrete floor was slick. Chains hung from beams. Old jars lined a shelf, each labeled with a name written in faded ink. And then, a voice. "Please help me." I froze. The sound came from behind a wooden partition. Before I could move, a shadow appeared at the top of the stairs. "Lena?" Harold's voice was calm. Too calm. I turned, and he stood there holding a Bible, face half lit by the bulb. "The Lord tests obedience," he said. "You almost failed." He closed the door and locked it. Darkness swallowed me. When I woke, my wrists burned. I was tied to a chair, basement floor cold under my bare feet. Harold knelt in front of me, humming that same hymn. "Why are you doing this?" I choked. He smiled kindly, brushing a strand of hair from my face. "Because, dear, the world has dirtied you. But don't worry, I can make you pure again. You're sick." He slapped me, not hard but sharp enough to silence me. Then he began reciting verses. His words echoed off the walls like a sermon in hell. He brought water, a bucket, and a rag. "We'll wash the lies away," he whispered. Every time I begged, he prayed louder. His eyes shone with fanatic devotion. "You remind me of my daughter," he said once. "She disobeyed too." That's when I realized what happened to them. His wife, his child, the others. I waited until he left to fetch more bleach. I saw a nail sticking out of the wall and started sawing at the rope around my wrists. My skin tore, but I didn't stop. When he came back, I was ready. "Ready to be saved?" he asked, stepping closer. I swung the chair leg. It shattered against his arm. He screamed, dropping the bucket. I ran, slipping on the wet floor, grabbing the keyring from his belt as I passed. My fingers shook as I fumbled at the door lock. He lunged. I kicked backward, heard him crash into the table. The door burst open and I bolted up the stairs, barefoot, bleeding, gasping. "Lena!" he roared behind me. "You can't leave before you're pure." I ran into the snow, blind, lungs burning. His voice followed, humming that same cursed hymn through the trees. I reached a ranger cabin miles away, pounding on the door until my knuckles bled. When they found me, I was half frozen, mumbling prayers that weren't mine. The authorities went to the farmhouse the next morning. The basement was spotless, bleach on every surface. No bodies, just chains, jars, and children's shoes sealed in plastic. Harold Pierce was gone. His truck abandoned by the river, doors open, Bible on the seat. They searched for weeks, never found him. I spent months in therapy jumping at every sound. Sometimes I still hear that hymn in my dreams, the one he played every morning, soft, slow, like a lullaby written by the devil. 2 months later, I got a package at the halfway home. No return address. Inside was a folded church bulletin from the Holy Shepherd Mission, County Road 47. Written in perfect penmanship. Obedience brings salvation. I'm still praying for you. I burned it in the sink. But every now and then, when snow falls heavy and the wind carries through the pines, I swear I can hear the faint echo of piano keys, and his voice, whispering my name. Evil often wears a gentle smile and speaks softly of faith, trust, and love. Never let desperation silence your instincts. The truest faith lies not in blind obedience, but in the courage to question what feels wrong, even when kindness wears the mask of salvation. I was 17 when I realized our house had stopped feeling like home. Maybe it was the way the wind screamed against the windows, or the salt that never left the air, or maybe it was just grief wearing new disguises every day. After Mom died, everything tilted. My little brother Milo stopped talking for a while. Dad stopped smiling. The funeral came and went like a fog, and then there was silence. Long, heavy, endless silence inside that weathered gray house on the cliff. Dad used to be gentle. He'd tell us bedtime stories about shipwrecks and old sailors, pour hot chocolate on stormy nights, and let Milo fall asleep on his shoulder. But after the accident, his warmth turned into rules. He said routines helped him keep the world in order. He said Fridays were special. He called them family nights of truth. The first time, I thought it was his way of coping. Just a game. He brought out a deck of worn playing cards and a small notebook with our names written neatly across the top. Douglas, Olivia, Milo. He set 3 wooden tokens in the center of the table and smiled the way people smile when they're trying not to cry. Games reveal the soul, he said. We play, we confess, we heal. We played like it mattered. He'd shuffle, deal, and every time someone lost, they had to share a truth. It started small, favorite color, biggest fear, dumb lies from childhood. But soon, the questions changed. What's something you've hidden from me? What's something your mother never knew? His voice never rose. He never sounded angry, but his eyes, sharp, glassy, waiting, made me feel like every answer was a test. That first Friday ended with him patting my hand gently. Good. Honesty keeps the family pure. I didn't sleep that night. A week later, I noticed the camera. It was small, silver, almost invisible above the kitchen shelf. A red light blinked, just once every few seconds. I thought maybe he'd bought it for security, but when I asked, he smiled too wide. Observing behavior keeps the soul aligned, he said. After that, I started noticing more. A black lens tucked near the living room clock. Another on the stairway. One hidden behind a vent in the hallway. Always blinking. Always watching. Milo caught on too. One morning, he slipped me a folded note under the table. I think he reads my journal. I wanted to tell him it wasn't possible, but I didn't believe that myself. Dad seemed to know everything. When we whispered, when we lied, when we dreamed of leaving. Every Friday night the game continued. He kept score in his notebook. Losers confessed. Winners stayed quiet. Remember, he'd say, his hand resting on the cards. Lying is poison. Confession is the cure. Milo started to fidget whenever Friday came. He'd fake stomach aches or pretend to fall asleep early. But Dad always woke him, gentle as ever. We don't hide from the truth, he'd whisper. The truth was turning into a weapon. I caught him one night watching playback on the living room camera, whispering to himself like he was taking notes. Patterns, he said. Deviations. Lies. That was when I started planning. It happened on a stormy Friday. Thunder rolling in from the sea, windows rattling like warning bells. Dad set up the game as usual, calm, methodical. But Milo was trembling. Can we skip tonight? he asked softly. Please? Dad's face didn't change. Truth doesn't wait, son. Deal the cards. Milo's hands shook so badly he dropped them. Dad's smile faltered for the first time in months. Careless hands come from careless hearts, he murmured. Maybe you've forgotten what this night means. I don't want to play anymore, Milo whispered. The silence stretched so long I thought time stopped. Then Dad leaned forward, eyes sharp as glass. You don't get to decide that, he said. I reached across the table. Dad, stop, he's scared. He's learning, Dad snapped, voice cracking just slightly before he caught himself. We all are. That night, I found Milo crying in his room. He had a cut on his wrist, small, shallow, but enough to make me freeze. He said I lied about Mom, Milo whispered. He said she's disappointed in me. I held him until he fell asleep, the storm pounding outside. When I stepped into the hall, I saw the red light blinking again. Steady, patient, unblinking. 3 weeks later, I told Dad I needed to go to the store for supplies. It was the first time he'd let me leave alone since Mom's death. He handed me the car keys and said, Truth runs errands too. Milo sat in the passenger seat clutching his backpack. We drove down the dirt road, past the cliffs, the fog so thick it felt like the sea had swallowed the sky. When I reached the curve overlooking the rocks, I slowed down and whispered, Now. We jumped. The car rolled to a stop behind us, engine still running. We ran through the fog, down the slope, feet slipping on wet grass, lungs burning. I didn't look back, but I could hear something. The faint echo of Dad's voice carried by the wind. Games reveal the soul. We reached a neighbor's house just before dawn. I pounded on the door until an old man opened it, eyes wide. Please, I gasped. He's watching us. He's not right. The police came within the hour. They found the cameras, the notebook, the cards, the tokens. But Dad was gone. It's been years since that night. Milo and I live in Portland now. He's in high school, plays guitar, laughs again. I still wake up some nights to the sound of shuffling cards. But it's just the wind, I tell myself. The police never found him. They think he might have fallen from the cliffs or maybe just disappeared into the fog. But I know better. Sometimes late at night, I'll be sitting in my apartment and a faint click will echo through the room, like a camera shutter. Once I even found a note slipped under my door. Honesty keeps the family pure. Same handwriting, same calm phrasing. The police said it was a prank, but deep down, I know he's out there, watching, waiting, maybe even proud that I finally learned the lesson he wanted to teach. Because now, I tell the truth. I tell it in therapy, in writing, in whispers to myself. And every time I do, I feel like he's listening. When love becomes control, it stops being love. Truth should heal, not haunt. Those who use honesty as a weapon twist faith into fear. And the only real escape is learning that freedom sometimes means breaking the rules written by those who claim to love you most. I left Boston on a gray Thursday morning. The sky heavy with rain and the memory of a lifetime in that cramped, toxic apartment weighing me down like a wet coat I couldn't shake off. My roommate, Liz, had always found ways to undermine me, belittling my art, borrowing my brushes without asking, and turning every little mistake into a catastrophe. I needed space. I needed air. I needed to feel safe again. And Vermont, with its dense pine forests and lakes that seemed carved from memory itself, called to me like a sanctuary. I packed my old hatchback with canvases, paints, a stack of journals, and the bare necessities. My parents were too far away to help, scattered across the country, and friends had their own lives. I was 30, alone, and utterly determined to begin over. I hadn't realized how much Boston had drained me until I hit the winding dirt roads of coastal Vermont, the kind that curled around hillsides and lakes with the careless elegance of something untouched by city chaos. That evening, at a small art festival in Montpelier, I met Gideon Hale. He was older than anyone I'd dated, maybe in his late 40s, with a calm voice that drew you in, and a smile that suggested knowledge but never arrogance. He complimented my paintings, spoke about technique, and seemed to understand the kind of obsession that came from loving your work too much. "Your brushwork," he said, tilting his head as he studied a watercolor of pines, "has the kind of honesty most artists lose by 25. Don't let anyone dull that." I felt warmth spread in my chest. Praise from strangers didn't usually move me, but something in his eyes made me feel safe. Weeks passed, filled with mentorship and long drives to secluded galleries where he showed me rare pieces he'd collected. Then, one evening, almost casually, he offered me a stay at his private cabin on Blackwater Lake. "It's quiet, private. Just enough space for your art to breathe," he said, voice gentle, eyes gleaming. "I promise, no distractions." I hesitated. The thought of leaving my city life behind scared me, but exhaustion and loneliness had clouded my judgment. I agreed. The cabin was stunning, perched on the edge of Blackwater Lake. Pine needles carpeted the ground outside. The air smelled of cedar, wet earth, and the faint tang of the lake itself. Large windows offered endless views of the water, and the wooden floors creaked underfoot, almost like the house itself was breathing. For a moment, I felt as if I'd stepped into a painting. Gideon's rules were simple but strange. No photos inside, phones only after 9. Never enter the lower guest room. At first I laughed. He seemed eccentric, harmless even. But then subtle things began to unsettle me. The way he watched me sit. The way he noted when I looked at my phone. His soft comments on obedience and curiosity. It wasn't menacing at first. It was almost imperceptible. But it made my chest tighten in a way I hadn't felt since the roommate fiasco. Then the small items started appearing. A rusted bracelet on the nightstand. A folded note with the name Marissa written neatly in ink. I asked him about them. "Reminders," he said, smiling but not warmly. "Curiosity, Claire, can be dangerous." At night I heard soft creaking above, the kind of slow, irregular noises that could be anything, or someone. The guest room, forbidden to me, seemed to whisper from below. I started locking my door, leaving the lights on, pacing the floors. Every shadow felt heavier than it should, every wind gust like a presence brushing past the windows. One morning I tried to leave, claiming I had an appointment in town. Gideon insisted on driving me, but he took a back road through thick pine and mud, the cabin appearing again and again, as if calling me back. My gut nodded. Inside he showed me a small room lined with envelopes and objects. Bracelets, photographs, sketches of women's faces, small personal items. My stomach dropped. "They were curious, like you," he said, voice calm but terrifying. I wanted to protect them from the chaos outside. Fear flooded me. Escape wasn't just difficult, it was being controlled at every turn. My pulse hammered in my ears as I realized I'd underestimated him, underestimated the danger. The windows, the back doors, even the forest around us, and everything felt like part of his trap. I began plotting quietly, noting exits, keeping my phone on vibrate in a hidden pocket. Each brush of wind against the cabin, each rustle of the trees became a countdown. He didn't need to speak to terrify me. The silence itself was a warning. The storm hit suddenly, lightning cracking over the lake, thunder rolling across the hills. I waited until Gideon was distracted with a fire I pretended to admire. Then I slipped out a side door, barefoot, mud squishing between my toes, pine needles scratching my legs. I ran without thinking, propelled by sheer instinct and the knowledge that hesitation would kill me. I reached the highway at dawn and flagged down a passing car. The driver, a middle-aged man in a faded pickup, didn't ask questions. I collapsed in the passenger seat, drenched, shivering, muttering only, "Somebody, please, help." Police later searched the cabin. Gideon was gone. The guest room was empty except for a rusted bracelet and dozens of envelopes labeled with women's names and dates. Some had letters inside, others sketches, all meticulous. The realization made my stomach churn. I hadn't been the first, and I might not have been the last. Months later, I'd moved to a small city, rented a studio apartment filled with my paintings, and cautiously rebuilt a life that had nearly been stolen. I still flinched at unexpected knocks, still smelled pine in strange places, still felt the lingering presence of someone watching. But I had survived. I painted late into the nights, poured myself into colors and shapes, and learned to trust myself again. My fear had carved a scar in my mind, but it had also taught me vigilance, courage, and the importance of boundaries. Sometimes, when I walk alone by a lake or through a forest, I feel the echo of that cabin behind me, the creak of the floors, the rustle of leaves, the shadow of a calm, piercing gaze. But I remind myself, I am no longer the frightened girl who followed blindly. I am Claire Donovan. I am alive. I am free. And I will never let curiosity blind me again. True independence and safety require discernment and boundaries. Trust is precious, but it must be earned. And courage is not the absence of fear. It is choosing to move forward despite it. Trauma may leave scars, but survival transforms them into wisdom. The first morning in my own apartment, the sunlight hit the pale walls like a promise. I brewed coffee, the aroma filling the small kitchen, and for the first time in years, I didn't have to worry about someone judging how I held the mug, whether the creases on the counter aligned with invisible lines etched in my childhood home. Portland, Maine felt like a fresh canvas, quiet, unassuming, and entirely mine. I'd grown up under my father, Ethan Lane, whose obsession with perfection was suffocating. After my mother died, he retreated into a world of rules. Every book lined perfectly on a shelf, every spoon equidistant from the others, every drawer folded with exact precision. A misplaced pillow or a crooked picture frame wasn't met with yelling. It was met with the cold, silent disappointment that gnawed at your confidence until you believed you had done something irredeemably wrong. Leaving that house had been my liberation. I changed cities, rented a small townhouse in a cul-de-sac lined with overgrown hedges, and told myself I was free. And for a while, I was. The apartment was modest, a tiny living room, a kitchen just big enough for me, and a bedroom I could close off from the world. I unpacked slowly, taking care to arrange things as I liked. Mismatched mugs, colorful blankets, and stacks of notebooks teeming with my sketches. I left a note on the fridge for myself, a small reminder. You're allowed to live your life your way. But it started almost immediately. Little things that made my stomach tighten. A sense that someone else was watching the angles of my life even here. My laundry was folded neatly, almost as if it had been pressed into symmetry. My bed was made perfectly. Pale blue sheets I hadn't seen in years, identical to the ones from my childhood bedroom. At first I laughed. Maybe a neighbor found a spare key. But no one had one. I double-checked. Every lock, every latch, every bolt was secure. Still, the feeling lingered. A subtle pressure at the edge of my mind, like static electricity brushing against my thoughts. I told myself it was paranoia, the last echo of years under my father's meticulous watch. But deep down, I knew freedom had limits I hadn't anticipated. Days passed, and the small disturbances became harder to dismiss. Objects moved slightly from where I left them. A vase on the counter would tilt, books on a shelf would be slightly rearranged. I'd open drawers to find them perfectly organized, each item aligned, almost mocking the chaos I was trying to cultivate in my life. One evening I cooked a stew I hadn't planned. The scent of cedar and peppermint suddenly hit me, faint but unmistakable, curling around the edges of the apartment. I froze, spoon hovering midair, heart thundering. No one should smell like cedar and peppermint inside my apartment, I thought. But then I tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was air from outside, a neighbor burning incense. When I reviewed my security footage, I saw a shadow slipping past the frame, tall, upright, familiar. The posture, the gait, the slow, deliberate movement down the hall, Unmistakably him, Ethan, my father. My stomach clenched. I had changed cities, changed locks, changed my phone number, even moved to a new state, and yet there he was, walking through my home without a single obstruction. He didn't force the door. He didn't break anything. He simply entered, as if his presence alone had the power to bypass walls, locks, and alarms. I tried to tell myself it was a glitch, a trick of light, but I knew better. I knew his control wasn't just about doors or locks. It was about presence, about a psychological tether that had followed me even into my adulthood. The morning he appeared at my doorstep, I nearly dropped the coffee mug in shock. "Harper," he said, voice calm, polite, with that same serene inflection I had dreaded all my life. "I just wanted to check on my little girl. You've grown so fast." I backed up, heart racing, trying to keep my composure. You can't be here. How did you find me?" He smiled, perfectly serene. "The world is chaotic, Harper. I just want to keep you safe. You can't truly live until you learn the rules." I wanted to scream, to slam the door, to throw him out like I had imagined for years. But there was no anger in his voice, only calm obsession. He didn't feel like a man invading a home. He felt like a force that had always existed, patient and relentless. "I don't need your rules," I whispered, trembling. "I live my life my way." "Rules aren't punishment," he said softly. "They are structure, safety. You will see one day." I shut the door and locked it 3 times. My hands shook. My body felt both exhausted and electrified. Even now, his presence clung to me, like the shadow of a tree stretching over my apartment, unmovable. I didn't stay. I fled that night, taking only essentials. I moved from friend to friend, city to city, trying to shake the sense that I was never alone. Even when I changed apartments, every subtle movement of objects, a slightly crooked picture frame, a folded napkin, a lingering scent, reminded me of him. I installed cameras. I changed locks. I asked trusted friends to check in, to help me feel some safety. I thought that moving was enough, but I quickly realized that the control he exerted wasn't bound by doors or fences. It was psychological, emotional, a tether stronger than any lock. Some nights I would wake, imagining him standing in the doorway, calm, smiling, waiting for me to falter. The fear of his return never fully left me, but I grew stronger. I documented, I planned, I fortified, and I reminded myself that my life, my choices, my freedom, belonged to me. Over time, I built routines. I learned to recognize the subtle signs of manipulation, the lingering scents, the oddly placed objects. I practiced mindfulness and therapy, learning to rebuild the confidence my father's control had eroded. I kept my apartment organized in my own way, not in fear, but with intention. I still flinched at unexpected noises, still smelled cedar or peppermint and felt a shiver run through me. But instead of panic, I reminded myself, these are memories, not current threats. I survived. I started dating, cautiously, slowly. I painted again, filling journals with sketches, colors, and landscapes of places I'd been and wanted to go. Each stroke reminded me that freedom is fragile, but it can be nurtured. I will always carry the scars, the lingering awareness that some control cannot be blocked with locks alone. But survival, courage, and discernment are stronger than fear. I am Harper Lane, no longer a child under watchful eyes. And finally, I live my life on my own terms. True freedom is not just about escaping physical confinement. It is about reclaiming your mind, asserting boundaries, and nurturing inner strength. Even when control lingers in memory, awareness and courage allow you to live fully and authentically. I grew up thinking my family was perfect. Our house on the quiet cul-de-sac in Burlington, Vermont looked like something out of a magazine. Colonial style, 2 stories, snow-dusted lawns in winter, trimmed hedges, and a small frozen pond in the backyard. From the outside, we had it all. Holidays in matching outfits, music recitals, barbecues that made neighbors nod approvingly. My mother, Claire Monroe, was warm and gentle, always smiling. My father, Gideon Monroe, was calm, composed, and demanding. But he had this way of making discipline feel like protection. I was 25 now, but I can still remember the first time I understood the difference between rules and obsession. It was a December evening when I was 12. My sister Lila and I were sitting on the couch trying to watch a movie, when Dad walked past muttering to himself. "Alex, Lila, the front door," he said quietly, stopping mid-step. "Locked?" "Yes, Dad," I said, feeling the hair on my neck stand up. He nodded once, satisfied, then continued pacing, whispering numbers and calculations to himself. Lila leaned close to me. "Alex, he doesn't sleep, does he?" I shrugged, trying not to sound scared. "I think he sleeps with one eye open." By 16, I understood that perfection in our house wasn't just a goal. It was a cage, a crooked picture frame, a candy wrapper left out. Even a small lie could trigger silent correction. There was no yelling, no outbursts, just a calm, unwavering presence that would watch, observe, and wait until guilt crushed you. I tried to see it differently, to rationalize it as discipline, as care. But by the time I graduated, I knew the truth. The house was a prison, and our family had been its unwitting inmates. When I left for college, I thought I had escaped. I moved across town, convinced that distance could sever the chains of my upbringing. But even miles away, the effect lingered. I still flinched at sudden movements, still lined up my books just so, as though doing otherwise would summon some quiet judgment. The real fracture happened one winter night when Lila called me in a panic. "Alex, he's different now. Mom, she's yelling at me. I don't know why." I didn't hesitate. I drove straight back, the snow crunching under my tires, anxiety knotting my stomach. The house was the same, outwardly perfect. But the air inside was wrong, heavy, thick, charged with something I couldn't name. I found Claire in the kitchen, her hands trembling as she adjusted the sugar bowl. She looked up at me, eyes wide, lips pressed together. "Mom, what's happening?" I asked softly. She shook her head. "Gideon, something's wrong. I can't." Her voice trailed off. I realized then that the perfection I had admired from the outside wasn't care. It was a methodical erosion of autonomy. My father had taken patience and love and transformed them into control, using calmness as a weapon. I began noticing subtle changes. Furniture shifted slightly. Doors that should have been locked were precisely aligned in a way only he could execute. Journals rewritten in his hand. Every object, every gesture, every moment in the house seemed designed to instill the same quiet terror I remembered as a child. By the time I was 18, I had to confront him. One evening after dinner, I stayed behind while Lila went to her room. I took a deep breath and said, "Dad, enough. You're hurting Mom. You can't keep doing this." He looked at me, calm, serene. His expression never faltered. "Hurting? Alex, I am protecting her, protecting this family. You don't understand. The world out there, it's diseased. Only here is safe." I noticed then the hidden cameras, tiny, almost invisible, the meticulous arrangement of chairs and tables, the notes he left for my mother rewritten in his hand. It hit me like a punch. Safety in this house was a lie. The perfection was a cage, and he held the key. I wanted to scream. I wanted to break the cameras, smash the walls, tear down every rule he had etched into the fabric of our lives. But I also knew anger wasn't enough. If we were to survive, we had to be smart. Quiet defiance was the only weapon I had. That night I stayed awake watching the hall, cataloging every movement, memorizing every step he took, every pattern, every ritual. Survival required observation. I spent months planning. Lila and I couldn't simply run. We had to mask our intentions until the moment was right. We packed essentials quietly, leaving the house as if for a day trip, In the dark of night, we loaded the car, leaving nothing behind that could draw attention. Driving away, snow crunching under the tires, I felt an unfamiliar exhilaration. Fear still pulsed through me, but there was hope too. Claire, my mother, had moments of lucidity, even smiles, though anxiety lingered. Lila clung to me, silent and wide-eyed, as though afraid to believe freedom could exist. Even miles away, the house haunted us. I found letters slipped under doors, unsigned but unmistakable in intent. You may leave, but perfection always watches. You belong to me and to the family rules. I realized then that the most dangerous prisons aren't physical. They are built of observation, habit, and psychological control. Even in the open air, the shadows of his obsession followed us. But we were free, not fully healed, not fully unscarred, but moving forward. Years later, we live in a modest townhouse in a town where neighbors are kind but unaware of our past. Claire occasionally snaps, anxiety flooding her like winter ice, but she also laughs at small, ordinary moments. Lila sleeps with the lights on, still wary of shadows, but she smiles more often than not. I keep journals, detailing our experiences, observing patterns, and reminding myself of boundaries. I sometimes dream of the old house, the quiet control, the meticulous alignments, the invisible eyes that watched. But those dreams no longer terrify me. They remind me of resilience. The real horror wasn't the yelling, the punishment, or the rules. It was calmness paired with obsession, patience used as a weapon, and the invisible pressure of control that shaped every thought, every fear, every movement. I survived, and in surviving I found strength. I learned that even when control reaches deeply, autonomy can be reclaimed with courage, careful observation, and determination. Freedom is not forgetting, but choosing to live despite the shadows that linger. True control is not always violent. Often it is subtle, patient, and silent. Recovery requires awareness, courage, and the willingness to assert boundaries. Even when psychological scars remain, reclaiming autonomy and choosing your own life is the ultimate form of liberation. I never thought I'd be back in Willow Creek, Oregon, not after everything I had left behind. After my divorce in 2022, my life felt like a half-burned bridge I couldn't cross again. I had tried to start over in Portland, chasing freelance gigs and cheap coffee shops, but the emotional toll of a messy split, the betrayal and the loneliness left me hollow. I called my mom almost reluctantly. Maybe reconnecting with family would be grounding, or at least temporary shelter from the storm of my own life. The drive back was long, winding through damp forests where fog clung to the trees like breath. Every mile brought memories I hadn't revisited in years. My mom's laughter bouncing off the walls of our old house, my dad's quiet sighs as he tinkered in the garage, the smell of rain on the wooden porch. I tried to tell myself this was just nostalgia, not a reason to hope too much. But when I finally pulled up to the house, the familiar white siding and blue shutters made something ache in me I didn't know I had left. Mom greeted me at the door with her signature smile, the one that always made me feel seen, even as a teenager. "Vivienne, you're home. Come in, come in. You look tired." Her arms wrapped around me, and for a moment, I let myself sink into that embrace. The house smelled the way I remembered it, cinnamon and pine cleaner, soft and safe. Or so I thought. Over the next few days, Mom insisted on helping me settle in. She fussed over my room, unpacking boxes I hadn't even wanted to touch, and she introduced a routine that included daily pills she claimed would help me sleep and calm my anxiety. I was weary, raw from the divorce, and for once I let someone else take care of me. The pills were small, beige, easy to swallow, and she always handed them to me with that warm, steady gaze that begged for trust. At first it felt harmless. I slept better, my thoughts slowed, and I told myself that maybe reconnecting with Mom was exactly what I needed. But after a week, things started slipping. I would wake up in the middle of the night, unsure of how I got there. My arms bore faint scratches, and once a friend texted me back with words I hadn't typed. My stomach churned with unease, and the trust I'd given Mom felt suddenly like a trap. One night, I skipped the pills. The effect was immediate. The fog in my mind lifted, and I saw the house for what it really was, not welcoming, but quietly watchful. Shadows lurked in corners, ordinary furniture seemed oddly positioned, and the silence carried a weight that made my skin crawl. That night, sleep came reluctantly, and my dreams were heavy with the sense that I was being watched. The next day, I started noticing oddities I had previously ignored. Smoke detectors that seemed oddly positioned, picture frames angled just so. My instincts screamed at me that Mom was watching, not just from a distance, but closely, intimately. I felt a creeping panic, a sense that the person I thought I knew, my mother, was something entirely else behind closed doors. It wasn't just paranoia. That night, I searched the living room and bedroom and found what I'd feared. Hidden cameras, their lenses disguised in everyday objects tracking my movements. Panic rolled through me like fire. I backed away from the frames, my mind racing. Every memory of Mom's warmth felt like a lie. I found myself in the study, a place I rarely entered as a child. There, behind the locked drawers, I discovered a small metal lockbox. Inside were meticulous records, names of women I didn't recognize, fake prescriptions, and handwritten notes detailing manipulative techniques. My hands trembled. The horrifying realization hit me. I wasn't the first. My mother, the woman I loved, had spent years drugging, monitoring, and controlling vulnerable women. The horror was incomprehensible. And just like that, the home I had returned to thinking it was safe had become a cage. I wanted to leave immediately, but fear and confusion pinned me to the study floor. The truth about my mother's life pressed down like a physical weight. How could someone who raised me, who had kissed my scraped knees and wiped away tears, be capable of such calculated control? I tried to process, but the house itself seemed alive, whispering the secrets it held. Every creak of the floorboards made me jump, every shadow seemed like it could lunge. I waited, heart hammering, until I heard the familiar shuffle of Mom's footsteps. "Vivian, what are you doing in here?" Her voice was soft, melodic, almost comforting. My stomach knotted. I was just looking for a pen," I lied, keeping my voice steady, though the room spun around me. She smiled, and that smile was different now, twisted, with an edge I hadn't known existed. "Just make sure you take your pills tonight, honey. You need to sleep. You'll feel better." She lingered, watching me like a hawk. My heart raced, but I nodded, pretending compliance. That night, I didn't take the pills. I stayed awake, pacing the floor, counting ceiling tiles, listening for her movements. Fear and adrenaline kept me alert. Hours passed. Then, in a fit of resolve, I decided I couldn't just sit and wait. I had to understand fully what I was dealing with. I returned to the study and examined the lockbox again. One drawer held binders detailing women she had controlled, dates, locations, drug dosages, escape attempts. Another drawer contained a set of syringes, some filled with amber liquid. Panic surged. I realized she had been preparing me from the first day I arrived, slowly dulling my awareness, eroding my ability to trust my own senses. I knew the moment I was caught would be deadly. My mother wasn't reckless. She was patient, calculating, precise. But I couldn't leave without evidence. I spent hours taking pictures on my phone, documenting everything. Every file, every hidden camera, every note could save someone else. Finally, exhaustion forced me to bed. My eyes barely closed before I heard the softest creak of the study door opening. I froze, heart in my throat. "Vivian," Mom whispered, her voice low, almost hypnotic. "Don't do anything foolish." I stayed perfectly still, pretending to be asleep. After a long minute, the footsteps receded. Relief washed over me, but I knew it was temporary. My mother would not stop, Not ever. I had to find a way out, carefully, quietly, without alerting her. My freedom depended on cunning, patience, and luck. And for the first time, I realized I was capable of both. The next night, I prepared. I memorized Mom's routines, the hours she spent in the kitchen, when she left the house, when she slept. My backpack contained a flashlight, my phone, and the small lockpick set I had brought on a whim. I had no idea if I could make it, but staying was no longer an option. At 11:47 p.m., as the house settled into silence, I slipped out of bed. My bare feet made almost no sound on the cold hardwood. I checked the living room first, then the kitchen. Mom's bedroom door was shut, and I could hear the low hum of the night. I moved to the bathroom, lifted the window, and forced it open. The cool air hit me like a jolt of electricity. The streets of Willow Creek were quiet, damp with fog. I ran, barefoot, heart slamming, ears straining for any sound of pursuit. I navigated the narrow roads instinctively, relying on memory from my childhood walks. Each step felt like liberation, but also like stepping out of reality into pure fear. After what felt like an eternity, I found the police station. My lungs burned, my hands shook, but I was alive. The officers listened, skeptical at first, but the evidence I had gathered, the photos, the records, the hidden cameras, left them no choice. Marlene Harper's reign of control ended that night, but the trauma lingered in me. Even years later, at exactly 8 a.m. and 9 p.m., I felt a chill run down my spine, a reminder of the pills, the fog, the control. Some memories, I realized, never fade. The authorities uncovered the depth of Marlene's manipulation. The women she controlled had been isolated, drugged, and psychologically terrorized. Diaries, medical records, and manipulated text messages painted a chilling portrait. I spoke to investigators, recounting my experiences, trying to make sense of what I had lived through. Each detail I shared was a tiny exorcism, a reclaiming of my voice and agency. Therapy helped me, slowly, to recognize that the trauma was not my fault. But the psychological residue remained. Flashbacks, mistrust, and moments of hypervigilance reminded me that freedom is not a cure for fear. Years later, I live in a small apartment in Portland. The fog of my past never fully lifts, but I feel stronger, more vigilant. I've rebuilt my life carefully, surrounding myself with people I trust. I returned once more to Willow Creek, not for closure, but to witness the house decay, stripped of the life Marlene controlled. The windows were broken, paint chipped, weeds overtaking the garden. The lockbox and cameras long gone. And yet, in the wind, I swear I hear faint echoes of control, whispers that the house remembers. But I have learned something crucial. Control can be taken, but trauma cannot always be erased. I cannot forget, but I can choose how to live. True freedom requires vigilance, courage, and the willingness to confront uncomfortable truths. Evil can hide in the most familiar places, even within family. And the only path to survival is reclaiming your voice, trusting your instincts, and never letting fear dictate your life. Trauma may linger, but strength and awareness can transform it into resilience. I never thought moving could feel this heavy. At 16, I'd already spent half my life watching my parents rip each other apart in courtrooms, lawyers' offices, and late-night phone calls that ended in yelling. When my mom announced she was marrying Victor Crane and we'd moved to Ashford, Connecticut, I was hesitant. Part of me wanted stability, yes, but another part of me was terrified of repeating the same cycle with someone new. Ashford was quiet, almost eerily so. The streets were lined with red brick houses and maple trees just beginning to shed their leaves, orange and crimson drifting across freshly paved sidewalks. Everything looked picturesque, like something out of a postcard. I should have felt lucky. I should have been relieved. Instead, my stomach knotted with unease the moment we pulled into our new driveway. Victor was waiting on the porch, crisp in his slacks and button-down, a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. He shook my hand firmly. "Ethan, welcome home," he said, and for a moment I tried to return the warmth. But there was rigidity to his posture, the way his gaze flicked to the windows, the way his jaw tightened for just a second before relaxing. He was polite, controlled, too calculated. The first few days passed in a blur of boxes, unpacking, and Victor's strict rules. Lights out at 10 p.m., no phone use after dinner, and most importantly, never touch the basement door. "It's just storage," he'd said, voice calm, reassuring. But the chains and padlock outside the door, heavy and industrial, told a different story. Victor's hands lingered near the doorknob more than once when he thought I wasn't looking, and sometimes I could swear he was listening, even when he was out in the yard. At night, the house spoke. Not with voices, not really, but with thumps, scratches, and the occasional low whimper that drifted up from below. Mom told me it was just the old pipe settling, but I felt it in my chest. The house was alive with something else. Curiosity wrestled with fear every time I heard it. I tried to tell myself it was nothing, but when sleep didn't come, the shadows seemed sharper, more menacing. I couldn't take it anymore one night. Around 3 in the morning, I slipped from my room, flashlight in hand, and approached the basement. The door was massive, the chains cold under my fingers, the padlock heavier than I imagined. My pulse pounded in my ears. I turned the handle just enough to peek through the small crack. Then he appeared. Victor. Sweat slicking his forehead, eyes glinting in the flashlight's beam. "Go back to bed," he muttered, voice low but filled with a tension that made me freeze. I backed away without a word. He lingered for a heartbeat, then disappeared down the hall. My curiosity had cost me nothing that night, but my instinct screamed that whatever lay behind that door was dangerous. Days passed, but my unease only grew. I noticed Victor's routines, his odd hours, the way he checked the basement at odd times, the intensity of his gaze when he thought I wasn't looking. I tried to ask Mom about it, carefully. "Ethan, it's just storage," she said, brushing it off with a smile that didn't meet her eyes. "Victor's careful, that's all." Careful. The word lingered, taste bitter on my tongue. I didn't believe her, and one night, curiosity won again. I had brought a bobby pin from my bathroom kit. Standing before the basement door, I worked at the lock quietly, turning the pin carefully until the padlock clicked. My heart slammed. Slowly, I pushed the door open. What I saw made me freeze. Chains hung from the ceiling, swinging slightly, tools stained dark with something that smelled like iron. On the walls, Polaroids of boys, some familiar faces from the local school district, eyes wide in terror, some distorted in fear. My stomach turned. Bile rose in my throat. Every sound from the house seemed amplified. The ticking of a clock, the hum of the furnace, even the wind outside. I wanted to scream, to run, but I knew if I did, Victor would appear before I even got to the stairs. My hands shook as I grabbed one of the Polaroids and shoved it into my backpack. That would be proof, something to show the authorities, something tangible. Victor's boots pounded the staircase before I could think, and he appeared looming. "What are you doing down here?" His voice cut through the air, sharp and commanding. I pressed my back into a corner, forcing a casual expression, pretending to search for something I'd dropped. Victor stared for a long minute, eyes icy, reading me like a book. Then, almost without warning, he left, his footsteps heavy and deliberate. I stayed frozen until I heard the door click shut, then bolted to my room. The house no longer felt like home. It felt like a trap. The next morning I told Mom everything. My voice trembled, the words barely coherent. "Mom, the basement. There are chains, Polaroids. I saw them." Her face paled, but she forced a tight smile. "Ethan, I think you're imagining things. That door, it's always been just storage." I wanted to argue, to show her the photo, but fear stopped me. She had always been my anchor, my protector, and I didn't want to destroy that image of her. Instead, I packed the Polaroid in my notebook, hidden beneath the pages, a secret talisman of truth. That afternoon, I went to the local police station. Officer Harlan listened carefully as I recounted everything. My voice was shaky, my eyes wide, but I was determined to be heard. When I returned home with an officer, the basement appeared normal, just old furniture, boxes, dust, chains gone, photos gone. Victor had vanished. The house was empty. My evidence, physical but fragile, was all that remained. Every sound in the walls, every shadow in the corner, reminded me he could be anywhere, watching. The officers took the Polaroid as proof, but they couldn't charge him without further evidence. I felt powerless. I had witnessed something monstrous, but the world outside the house couldn't see it. All I could do was wait, watch, and keep the memory alive. Months passed, but Ashford never felt safe. Every creak in the floor, every gust of wind against the windows, sent chills down my spine. Nights were worse. Sometimes I thought I could hear the faintest whisper, a voice carried on the wind. Shadows in the corners of my room made my stomach knot. School became an escape, but even there, my mind drifted back to the basement, to Victor's eyes, to the Polaroids. Friends noticed my silence, my jumpiness. "Ethan, you okay?" one asked. I forced a nod, smiled faintly, but inside I felt fractured. I knew one thing with certainty. Some secrets are too dark to fully uncover. Some truths live just beneath the surface, waiting to emerge. And some monsters don't leave a trail. They vanish, leaving only fear in their wake. Years later, I moved out of Ashford. College, part-time jobs, new friends. I built a life that didn't require me to look over my shoulder. But at night, in quiet moments, I still hear it. The metallic scent of the basement, the faint whimpers, the clatter of chains in my mind. The Polaroid still rests in my notebook under my bed. Sometimes I take it out just to remind myself that I survived, that I saw the truth and didn't succumb. Victor Crane is gone, or maybe he isn't, but I've learned to live with the shadows. I've learned vigilance, awareness, and the value of trusting my instincts. I've learned that fear, while paralyzing, can also be a guide. And though some secrets are never fully uncovered, survival is about reclaiming your life, step by careful step. The world holds darkness in places we least expect, and some monsters wear familiar faces. Awareness, courage, and trusting your instincts can protect you even when evidence is scarce. Survivors may carry fear and memories forever, but strength lies in acknowledging the truth and refusing to let it define who you become. I had always admired my mother, Rachel Whitaker, without question. Growing up in Eugene, Oregon, I watched her every night as she meticulously applied creams, powders, and masks, speaking in that calm, precise tone that made me think everything in the world had an order. She had flawless skin, soft hands, and a presence that filled the house like sunlight streaming through foggy windows. At 17, I still idolized her, even though I sometimes felt stifled by her rules. Lights out by 11, no unsupervised friends, strict curfew, and no wandering outside after dark. It was late autumn of 2020, the kind of cold night where fog curls around streetlights, and every footstep sounds louder than it should. Eugene was quiet, too quiet, and lately that silence made me uneasy. The news had been full of it. Murders, dubbed by the local papers as the Stitcher murders. Teenagers mostly, disappearing in the shadows. Something about the way these crimes were reported gave me chills, but I never thought, not for a second, that the danger could be closer than the fog-laden streets. That evening, I returned home from my part-time job at the bookstore. The streets were slick with rain, the wind sharp against my face. I expected Mom to be gone, maybe out for her nightly errands, but then I heard it, muffled sobs echoing from the basement. My heart stopped. I whispered, almost too softly to hear myself, "Mom? Is someone down there?" There was no answer, only the sound of something being dragged across the floor. Fear and curiosity collided inside me like two trains on a collision course. I gripped the railing, bare feet on the cold wooden steps, and descended into the dim light of the basement. The bulb flickered, casting long, uneven shadows. I froze. My mother's familiar face was twisted into something unrecognizable, something dark and predatory. She crouched over a teenage girl, one I didn't know, her hands busy with precise movements, draining blood into small glass jars that reflected the dim light. The air smelled sweet, metallic, and I gagged, my stomach twisting violently. Rachel looked up suddenly, her eyes locking on mine. The smile that curled her lips was terrifying, casual, and yet filled with a calm malice I had never seen. "Lena, you shouldn't have come early," she said softly, but I could hear the predatory undertone lurking beneath her words. My legs felt like lead. I couldn't move. Then it clicked. The red masks she had worn during her nightly routines, the ones I had assumed were just beauty rituals, they were made from human blood. My mind raced. I scanned the basement and froze harder. Shelves lined with small glass containers, eyes, teeth, hair, trophies from victims long gone. My mother was a monster, but to her, it was meticulous work, art even. I had no time to think. I grabbed a vial of sleeping powder from the counter, trembling so badly my hands shook. Pouring it into a cup of tea, I whispered under my breath, "Drink," praying it would work. Rachel's eyes narrowed, suspicion flashing for a heartbeat. Then a few minutes later, she collapsed, the calm violence gone, as if it had never been. I ran upstairs immediately, waking my younger brother Tyler. "Tyler, get your coat. We're leaving." My voice was urgent, shaking. Together, we slipped out into the rainy night, the chill and fog doing nothing to wash away the horror I had just witnessed. The police arrived quickly, guided by my frantic call. Rachel was arrested, and for once the news headlines matched reality. The Stitcher murders finally stopped. But even as officers led her away in handcuffs, I knew something about this wouldn't leave me. The basement, the jars, the calm in her eyes, some things lingered beyond the bars of a jail cell. And in the quiet of our home, every shadow seemed heavier, every reflection in the mirror slightly off. The day after Rachel's arrest, I sat on the couch staring at the walls of our home as if seeing them for the first time. It was too quiet. Tyler clung to my side, and I felt responsible for him in a way I hadn't before. "Lena, will she hurt anyone else?" he asked quietly. I hugged him tight. "No. No one else," I lied, though I wasn't entirely sure I believed it. As I wandered through the house, I noticed things I had ignored for years. Tiny glass vials hidden in drawers, a faint metallic scent in the laundry room, journals filled with diagrams and notes on skin, veins, and methods. Every innocent beauty ritual I had admired was tainted now, an act of horror masquerading as perfection. I began to question every interaction, every rule. Her insistence on structure, on control, on perfection. It wasn't just about parenting or skincare. It was about dominance, precision, and secrecy. She had spent years shaping our world, molding perception, keeping the truth hidden in plain sight. The police let me look at the basement again, but it had been cleared. Jars, masks, notes, all gone, catalogued as evidence. The stark emptiness left me with the weight of imagination. I had seen enough to know what was real, but the world outside could never fully grasp the horror that had unfolded here. Even small things haunted me. The way she had smiled while controlling life and death, the meticulous order she maintained while committing murder, the red masks that now seemed grotesque rather than beautiful. I realized trauma wasn't just about what you saw. It was about what you knew was possible. Tyler and I stayed with a family friend for a while. The nights were worst. Every time a shadow crossed the street, every time a stranger knocked on the door, I flinched. I imagined Rachel still watching, still planning, still smiling. I knew that seeing her taken away didn't erase the control she had exercised over our lives. I returned to the house slowly, needing closure, but fearing it at the same time. The basement was sealed, the lock sturdy, but every creak of the floorboards, every flicker of the lights reminded me of her presence. I couldn't trust silence. I couldn't trust stillness. School offered some distraction, but it was impossible to forget. Every reflection in a mirror, every careful glance at the news reminded me that someone I loved could hide something monstrous beneath a smile. The lesson was cruel. Monsters aren't always strangers. Months passed. Rachel's trial became a local spectacle. People were shocked, horrified, and fascinated. I tried to reclaim normalcy, school, friends, homework, but mirrors were my enemies. Every time I brushed my hair or looked into glass, I imagined her eyes staring back at me, calm, methodical, unbroken. Even Tyler asked questions I couldn't fully answer. "Do you think she'll ever come back?" His voice quivered. I hugged him tight, whispering, "No, we're safe now." Though a part of me always doubted. Trauma is not cured by justice alone. I began to write things down, keeping a diary of memories, thoughts, and patterns. It helped, but the basement, the jars, and the masks remained engraved in my mind. I realized survival was not the same as healing. A year later, we moved into a new apartment in another part of Oregon. The air smelled different, fresher, free of metallic undertones. Tyler laughed more easily, and I could sleep without the constant tremor in my chest. But the lessons remained. I watched people more carefully, trusted instincts above appearances, and understood that love and admiration could blind you to darkness. I could never forget my mother's calm cruelty, but I could choose how to live. At night, reflection still caught me off guard. Sometimes I shivered, imagining what might have been. But now I also felt a strange resilience, a knowledge that I had faced something unimaginable and survived. I had reclaimed control over my life, even if some scars were permanent. True evil often hides behind familiar faces and outward perfection. Survival requires vigilance, courage, and the willingness to confront uncomfortable truths. Trauma may linger, but strength comes from acknowledging the darkness, reclaiming your life, and refusing to let fear define your future. I spent 18 years of my life thinking perfection was a standard you had to obey or face consequences. My mother, Angela Dawson, made sure I learned that lesson every single day. From the outside, Maplewood, New Jersey, was the kind of town people bragged about. Manicured lawns, cherry blossoms lining sidewalks, neighbors who waved as you walked past. But our two-story colonial house, pristine and polished as it looked to the world, was a prison I could never escape. Mom was admired in the community. She hosted charity events, coached the local tennis team, and wore a smile that could melt strangers into admiration. She had that charisma, the kind that makes you believe someone is good, kind, untouchable. But inside our walls, her smile was a blade, a misplaced book, a streak of dust, or even the wrong inflection in my voice could ignite fury. I learned to anticipate her moods like a soldier anticipating enemy fire. The meals were timed with military precision. Breakfast at 7, lunch at noon, dinner at 6. Any deviation earned a sharp slap or verbal attacks so venomous, I would spend hours trembling on my bed, questioning myself. My father had left after the divorce years ago, leaving me alone with her scrutiny, alone with her obsession with control. I remember one spring evening in 2021 when the cherry blossoms outside swayed gently in the breeze. The town was calm, almost idyllic, but inside the tension was thick enough to choke on. I had spent the entire day at school, then hours cleaning, doing homework, and preparing for my mother's dinner with a few neighbors. I was exhausted, but I took pride in completing everything perfectly, or so I thought. Mom's eyes landed on the TV. A tiny speck of dust clung stubbornly to the corner of the screen. It was insignificant, but she saw it. Her eyes narrowed, sharp as knives. "Emily, did I not tell you that even the smallest imperfection is unacceptable?" Her voice cut across the room, freezing the guests mid-bite. I froze, my stomach knotting. "I'm sorry, Mom. I didn't notice it, I stammered, voice trembling. Her fury erupted. It was not a controlled anger, this was something deeper, darker. She grabbed a kitchen knife from the counter with terrifying speed. Before anyone could react, she lunged. One of the guests, a neighbor who had always treated me kindly, tried to step in. Angela stabbed them. Blood sprayed across the white tile floor, hot and shocking, and the sound of screams filled the air. I didn't think. I ran, socks slipping against the hardwood floors, arms clutching myself to avoid the smell and sight of blood. I bolted out of the house and into the empty streets. The cherry blossoms seemed peaceful now, but I couldn't see beauty in anything. The neighbor had called the police. I collapsed on their doorstep, sobbing uncontrollably, unable to speak. By the time officers arrived, Angela was already screaming my name, her fury and obsession spilling into the night air. I didn't look back. I had survived. But part of me knew this was only the beginning of trauma I couldn't outrun. After Angela's arrest, I moved into a small apartment not far from Maplewood. I wanted independence, freedom, and a life that didn't include walking on eggshells for fear of making someone's temper explode. But escaping her physical presence did not erase the years of psychological control. At first, every shadow was suspicious, every creak in the floor or rustle of paper a potential threat. I flinched at voices behind doors, jump-scared by unexpected touches. Sleep was fitful. Daylight was no sanctuary. Even during simple chores, I imagined my mother's eyes judging, scrutinizing, waiting for a misstep. I began keeping a diary. I wrote every detail of my life, my thoughts, my fears. The act of writing felt like a lifeline, a way to disentangle my mind from the lasting effects of living under constant surveillance and cruelty. I called my best friend Mara nearly every night, talking through nightmares and memories, trying to normalize the chaos that lingered in my mind. The apartment was small but safe. I could lock doors without fearing her will somehow forcing them open. I could cook whatever I wanted, leave things untidy without punishment, and still breathe. And yet, the memories lingered. I would glance at my reflection and see flashes of her face overlaid on my own. Smiling, cold, judging. I would catch my reflection in a store window and flinch, imagining her watching, waiting for me to fail. Even mundane things, checking the stove, folding laundry, unlocking a mailbox, became exercises in self-awareness. I realized trauma isn't just what you survive. It's what you carry with you long after the danger has passed. Months passed. I enrolled in college courses, started working part-time at a cafe, and tried to build a routine. I laughed more freely, and Tyler, my younger cousin who sometimes stayed with me, seemed more relaxed. But the shadow of my mother's obsession never left. One afternoon, as I unpacked boxes from a coat I had donated, a meticulously folded note slipped out from a pocket. I froze. In careful, perfect handwriting it read, "Perfection is always watching." My heart skipped. It was like a physical blow to my chest. I realized with a mixture of horror and clarity that no matter how far I ran, no matter how independent I became, part of her control, her obsession with perfection, had embedded itself into my mind. It had created habits, anxieties, and reflexes that would take years to dismantle. I paced my apartment, heart racing. The note was probably unrelated, a coincidence, but it felt like a message from her, a reminder that perfection, in her twisted sense, was always observing. I forced myself to breathe, to remind myself I was safe now. But the lingering sensation of judgment was real. I could not unlearn it overnight. Nights were hardest. I would wake in cold sweats, haunted by the memory of blood on the kitchen tiles, the way her eyes seemed to pierce through me. Mirrors became instruments of paranoia. Every reflection reminded me of her obsession, her control, and my own vulnerability. I began therapy. The sessions were excruciating, peeling back layers of fear and shame I had carried since childhood. I learned that surviving her wasn't just about physical escape, it was about reclaiming my identity. I learned to notice triggers, to recognize anxious patterns, and to challenge the compulsions she had instilled in me. Gradually, I started setting small boundaries. I left dishes in the sink, skipped perfectly timed chores, and allowed myself to make mistakes without immediate self-flagellation. It was terrifying at first, but each small act of rebellion against ingrained fear was liberating. A year later, I felt more like myself than I had in nearly 2 decades. The apartment was mine. The streets of Maplewood no longer harbored terror in my mind, and I could breathe without anticipating judgment. Tyler was happier, my friends supportive, and my life slowly felt normal. Yet, perfection's shadow lingered. Occasionally, when folding laundry or arranging a bookshelf, I caught myself holding my breath, remembering her standards. It was a reminder that trauma does not vanish. It transforms, leaving caution and awareness in its wake. I realized that surviving was not enough. Healing required conscious effort, vigilance, and self-compassion. I had reclaimed my life, but part of me remained shaped by what I endured. And maybe that was okay, as long as it strengthened me rather than imprisoned me. Trauma can follow you even after the danger has passed, embedding fear, control, and anxiety into daily life. True freedom is not merely escaping physical harm, but reclaiming your mind, boundaries, and sense of self. Survival is an act of courage, and healing is a continual process of recognizing the past while refusing to let it define your future. I still remember the bitter scent of burnt coffee that morning, clinging to the air like a warning. Dad had been tense for weeks, ever since his business collapsed and creditors started calling. That wasn't unusual for him, but what had changed was the intensity. Everything became a spectacle in his eyes, including us. Me, my little sister Lila, and Mom. We were actors in his obsessive performance, and somehow, we were always failing. It started innocuously. Cameras in the living room, the kitchen, hallways. Dad called it protection, but it didn't feel protective. It felt like surveillance. "You two sit there," he barked one evening, pointing to a corner of the living room. "I need to see how you react when things go wrong. Acting is everything." Mom stayed quiet, sinking into herself more each day. Her eyes seemed hollow, watching us as if she were already planning her escape. Then came the whispers. At first, I blamed my imagination, the old house settling. But one night I heard them clearly outside my locked bedroom door. "Who's there?" I whispered, my voice trembling. Silence. I pressed my ear to the door, heart hammering. I crept downstairs. Every security camera flickered with static except the attic camera. I climbed the narrow stairs. In the corner of shadows, Dad crouched muttering, "It has to be perfect. Betrayal. Perfect plan." Before I could move, he vanished. The living room was empty except for a note on the table. "I'm always watching." For years, Mom had been gone, or at least that's what we were told. Could she have returned? My pulse quickened. If Dad was gone, maybe the real danger had changed, and the house itself felt alive, whispering threats in every creak. After that night, the air in the house felt heavy. Every door creaked, every shadow seemed alive. I started noticing things. Doors unlocked when I was sure I'd locked them. Items moved from where I left them. My brain screamed it was paranoia, but my gut told me someone was inside. Dad's obsession had left me hyper-aware. I installed my own cameras, small, hidden ones, and began keeping a journal. Every oddity, every missing object, every whisper. Lila stopped asking questions. She just followed me, whispering her fear when she thought I wouldn't hear. One afternoon, I found Dad's old laptop buried under newspapers in the attic. It had files, hours of edited videos of us, clips twisted to make us look incompetent, scared, or cruel. My stomach churned. The man I'd grown up fearing had been shaping our lives like a director in a horror film. I confronted Mom's absence. Letters, phone calls, and even hired private investigators led nowhere. And yet, I kept feeling watched. Whoever was leaving notes, whatever, or whoever, was in the shadows. It wasn't Dad. Then I saw it. One night on a camera feed, a figure, familiar in posture, moving silently. Hair tied back, small frame, deliberate steps. My heart froze. Mom? Could it really be her? I ran to the spot the camera had captured, but the figure was gone, leaving only a scrap of paper. Not everything is as it seems. The revelation unsettled me more than Dad ever did. My family history wasn't just broken, it was living, breathing, and plotting. I started digging into Mom's life before her disappearance. Bills, her social media, old friends, nothing made sense. But patterns emerged. She'd been meticulous, patient, planning. Dad had always been violent, cruel, unstable. If anyone were capable of surviving him and turning the tables, it was Mom. One evening, the whispers returned. I followed them into the basement. Boxes of old possessions littered the floor. A photo album hidden beneath heavy blankets revealed Mom's careful observations of Dad's decline. Notes about arguments, threats, and even Dad's obsession with filming everything. It hit me then. Mom hadn't left because she gave up. She had vanished to survive, to learn, to wait. And now she was back, not to reconcile, but to take control, using Dad's reputation as the perfect mask. I felt a mix of relief and terror. Relief that Dad wasn't lurking, but terror that Mom had become something unrecognizable. Someone I didn't know. Someone beyond my understanding. The first note I found from her in weeks read, "I'm closer than you think. Trust no one. Not even your memories." I panicked, unsure if this was a game or a warning. Then I saw her, standing in the doorway, eyes sharp, quiet. "You knew he would ruin everything," she said softly. "I couldn't let that happen. He's gone, but the world remembers him." "Mom?" I whispered, feeling a storm of emotions. Anger, fear, relief. "You left me. You left us." "I left to protect you," she said, calm but firm. "And now, I need you to understand that protection sometimes doesn't look like what you expect." Her plan was meticulous. Every letter, every whisper, every hint of danger had been orchestrated to ensure Dad's legacy couldn't hurt us. It wasn't cruelty. It was justice, twisted and precise. It took weeks to rebuild the house of my life, both literally and emotionally. Lila returned to normal routines. Dad's threats no longer haunted the walls. Mom stayed close but invisible, guiding without intrusion. I learned to sleep again, to trust again. The house, once a cage of fear and obsession, became a home filled with caution and understanding. I realized that life was fragile, and control could be a weapon if left unchecked. One night I found a final note from Mom. "Survival isn't about hiding. It's about knowing when to act." I smiled faintly, finally understanding. Sometimes the greatest dangers come not from outside, but from those we trust or fear. True protection often requires courage, foresight, and patience. And in life, control is a fragile illusion. Letting go, observing, and acting wisely can save not only ourselves but those we love. Dad was a celebrated theater actor once, someone whose name drew applause and admiration. The kind of man who could make an audience weep with a single glance, whose presence filled a room. But obsession, oh, it destroyed him. After a disastrous performance that went viral for all the wrong reasons, he spiraled, clinging to the idea that life itself was a stage and he was its master director. Growing up, our lives became his scripts. Mom, Lila, and I weren't just family. We were his cast, and every day was a rehearsal he refused to end. Cameras appeared everywhere. The living room, the kitchen, the hallway. At first, Dad called it practice, training us to respond naturally under scrutiny. But soon, it was more than that. "You're too stiff here," he'd critique over dinner, pointing at Lila's posture. "You hesitate, like you're hiding fear. Fear is vital. It shows authenticity." I hated it. Every glance, every casual gesture, became fodder for his analysis. Photographs taken without our knowledge lined the walls of his study, each annotated with cryptic notes. test loyalty, observe reaction, measure hesitation. Mom tried to intervene. "This isn't healthy," she'd whisper in the kitchen, voice trembling. "You're turning them into experiments." Dad laughed, a sharp, hollow sound. "Experiments? No, it's art. Life is art, Margaret. You'll see one day." It wasn't until I reached 16 that I fully understood the gravity of his obsession. One night I wandered into the basement, always locked, always off limits. That evening, the door was slightly ajar. Curiosity got the better of me. As I descended the steps, the smell of dust and old wood mingled with a strange metallic scent. The basement had been transformed into a stage. Childhood traumas were meticulously recreated. The cracked wall where I fell off my bike. The dented dresser where Dad punished me for lying. A single chair under a spotlight where I'd been forced to confess imagined sins. Dolls with my likeness sat on shelves, their eyes eerily lifelike, staring at me. Footsteps echoed behind me. Panic gripped my chest. I spun around, but no one was there. "Hello?" My voice barely carried over the silence. The lights flickered, and shadows danced across the walls. I rushed up the stairs only to find the main floor strangely empty. Dad had vanished, but he wasn't the only one. The next morning, the house felt heavier. I checked the cameras, but all the footage was corrupted, static eating away frames like a digital cancer. My parents seemed distant, Mom more so than ever, quiet and withdrawn. But Dad didn't appear in any recording. He hadn't left a note, hadn't called, just gone. At first I convinced myself he had stepped out for groceries, rehearsals, some mundane excuse. But the air of dread lingered, an invisible stage surrounding me. I started documenting everything, every strange noise, every missing object, every sensation of being watched. Lila joined reluctantly, whispering fears she wouldn't say aloud. A week passed. Then, at night, I heard voices in the basement. Low murmurs, rhythmic chanting almost. My hands trembled as I descended with a flashlight. The basement looked different. Where childhood traumas had been recreated, now there were rows of chairs facing a makeshift stage. Figures in hooded robes sat silently, faces hidden, eyes fixed on the empty chair under the spotlight. I froze. My chest tightened. "Who are you?" I demanded. Silence. Then a whisper, soft, almost teasing. "The performance continues." I bolted. Upstairs, I found Mom in the kitchen. "Do you know what's happening?" I asked. Her eyes widened and she shook her head slowly. I don't. But I felt it too. Something's wrong. It wasn't just Dad anymore. Whoever, or whatever, had taken over his work, his obsession, his experiments. They weren't going to stop. Over the next few nights, the sounds intensified. Footsteps pacing the hallways. Whispers in languages I didn't understand. The faint rustle of papers, like scripts being edited in real time. I tried to leave the house once, but the doors wouldn't unlock, as if the house itself was complicit. I started noticing things I hadn't before. Photographs of strangers in the frames Dad had kept for family pictures, scribbled notes in the margins of his old scripts. Observe reaction. Fear is genuine when unprovoked. Loyalty is fragile. One night, I returned to the basement with a crowbar, desperate for answers. The lights flickered, revealing figures moving like marionettes. As I stepped closer, I recognized the familiar cadence of Dad's voice on a recorder. Fear is the ultimate truth. Pain is the lens. Witness them, shape them, control them. I realized the horror. Dad had been dead for months. The voice, the notes, the recordings, they were all posthumous. And these strangers, this cult, were continuing his work, rehearsing our lives as if we were unwilling actors in a never-ending play. My sense of reality began to fracture. I'd walk into rooms and find them rearranged to mimic scenes from my childhood. Sometimes I would see a figure in the corner, shrouded, faceless, but somehow familiar, moving just at the edge of my vision. I confronted Mom. "This isn't just Dad. It's..." It's people. Cult members. They've taken over the house, our lives, everything. She hugged me tightly. I know. I've seen them too. We have to survive, not fight blindly. You remember what he taught us. The lessons buried in the fear, the patterns. We have to use that knowledge now. Using everything Dad had drilled into me, the cues, the timing, the behavioral patterns, I started to anticipate their movements. I learned to navigate the house at night without being seen, to avoid their cameras, to remain unseen. Survival was a performance, and I had to be the ultimate actor. The night I decided to end it, I returned to the basement for the last confrontation. The cult was there, the empty chair under the spotlight glowing ominously. I stepped forward, confident now in my understanding of the performance. "You don't control me anymore," I shouted. Silence. Then the whispers. "The audience demands perfection." I realized something crucial. Dad had died, but obsession didn't. Obsession had become a living entity, carried on by those who worshipped it. And I couldn't destroy it with anger or fear. I could only survive by recognizing the truth. Control was never theirs to wield. I escaped that night, careful, deliberate, leaving the basement empty, leaving the house behind. I walked into the street, the cold air biting, and I finally felt a sense of freedom. The shadows of Dad's obsession would always linger, but I had reclaimed my life, my mind, my reality. Obsession, unchecked, can consume not only the one who wields it, but everyone in their orbit. True control comes not from domination but from self-awareness, courage, and the willingness to step away from destructive patterns before they define you. Life is not a stage to manipulate. It is a reality to live, fully, freely, and responsibly.